Do I have a motion to establish the agenda?
I move we establish the agenda as published.
Second.
All in favor of establishing the agenda as published, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Public input. I can't actually read the thing because I'm not logged in. So I'm having a little technical difficulty.
Oh, you mean the
We'll
The
just
statement?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
attached to the. Sorry, give me a moment, everyone. Thank you. Okay, this meeting is a meeting of the board in public. It is not a public meeting that guarantees interaction between members of the public and members of the board. When addressing the board at the meeting, please limit your remarks to not more than 3 minutes. Appoint a spokesperson if the concern is a group concern, and if desired, provide written documentation to the board secretary. Public comments that name or otherwise identify a district student are not permitted without permission of that student's parent or legal guardian. The board may direct the superintendent to respond at a later date to the issues expressed. Okay, so we have 2 people signed up for public comment tonight. The first is William, actually with 3, right? We have William,
I believe just two.
just 2, okay. We have William, I don't know how to pronounce it, Gertis?
That's what we say, but it's probably wrong as well.
Gertis.
Hey, thank you for your work. I'm excited to be starting this meeting. That's weird. Usually you lead off with the good stuff. My name is William Gertis. I am an employee of the school district. I have a child in 1st grade at Northwood, going to be in 1st grade. I'm going to have a daughter who's going to be a kindergartner next year. I grew up on the island. I live on the island. I'm happy to be here and have your time. I want to ask a question about, and I know you guys aren't necessarily going to answer this, but just to put it in your mind, what is going on with our bargain between our union and the district? My understanding is that several neighboring districts have already settled their bargains with including the 5.5% allocation for the implicit price deflator or better included in their settlements. And we don't have a contract yet going into this next year. And my concern is how are we going to attract and retain high quality talent if we're not competitive in the prices? And so I'm hoping that as a board, you could please investigate what's going on with that. I can speak personally to my experience with the transportation department about how hard it is for us to be competitive when we sometimes don't have wages that are competitive with nearby districts. But I will save that. You're welcome to ask me about it if you're interested. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next public inputter is Laura Fitzgerald via Zoom.
Not here, so.
Laura, if you can hear us, I'm inviting you to join as a panelist. Could you accept that invite? She's coming on now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Mine basically is a follow-up to what the gentleman before me was saying about the negotiations being prolonged and stalled, and the state funding that was put aside for that, for the teacher increase. And that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time as well.
Okay, thanks, Laura. And we've got one more public inputter. We've got Kristen Kim, who is here in person, correct? Okay, Kristen, you're up. Oh, okay, really fast. If you don't mind coming to the podium.
Okay,
You have 3 minutes.
okay. I have some questions. How does the district plan to continue to provide high quality education and SEL support in light of rifts over the past 2 years? Didn't the state provide money to increase staffing to reduce student to state staff ratio and provide our students with additional support? Was there an increase in counselors in the last 2 years? Question.
You missed the kind of introductory comment. So
Sorry.
it's okay, just so you know that we don't respond to questions or inquiries like on the spot.
Yes.
But we may direct the superintendent to reply to your question at a later date. Yes, thank you. And I think that is it for public input tonight. No one else has signed up. So yeah, that's great. Next, we've got the superintendent report.
We have enough information inside the Word packet tonight that any update I have is already in the agenda.
Okay, great. That's probably the shortest superintendent report in history. Partial governance process monitoring, starting with board policy 1800 OE6 budgeting and financial planning. This is our quarterly update on the 2021-2022 budget.
Great. If we could, Andrews, bring up the quarterly budget underneath partial governance A. Dr. Booby and Aaron and Director Battersby, I think you can probably just present tonight from where you are. I don't think, because we don't have a lot of staff, rather than come to that table unless you'd like to present from that table. Okay, why don't we keep you there? So one of the things that we are committed to as we're moving forward is to try to not only present information, but present it in a way that we think not only you as a board, but our public can really understand and make sense of the numbers. And so we did some work with our partners at Forecast 5. We already have a contract with them. The tools that are available are already there. And Dr. Booby, she's been filling in as an interim finance director, has done a lot of work with Finance 5 to really try to figure out what are some ways that we can present the same information you've been getting, but maybe in a different way. So that's why you'll see the format's a little different, but I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Booby to walk us through the end of June report.
All right, thank you. So as Fred said, we are putting together different graphics for you. What you're seeing here is our general fund expenditures year to date as of the close of June 30th. In expenditures, you can see we projected to expend in basic education at 85% of our budgeted amount, but we've only expended 78%. And the same thing with salaries and benefits, we projected to spend 94% of our budget amount, we've only spent 79%. So as you look at that, we're projecting our year-end fund balance at this snapshot, because you're going to hear something different in a few minutes as we have more updated information than when we did at the end of June. The year-end balance with this snapshot is at 2.79% fund balance. Here, year-to-date revenues by source. You might notice there is a significant increase in the federal funds on this. That's about a $2.8 million increase, and this is due to a slight increase in the food services, but mostly because of the governor's emergency education relief fund that accounts for 72% of the increase, and then the ESSER funds as well. And then on expenditures to date, you'll notice that there is a increase in purchase services. That's the red amount there on top. And that, as I was digging into this, I was working with our department and just had forgotten about the impacts of COVID on food service. And that's why in 21, the year before, food service was lower, but this year it's higher. And it's more back to normal. So we, in the 21 year, the next to the last bar graph, you can see we had free lunch for K-8, and we had no students eating lunch in person until about January. And then this year, it shows a 57% increase in that food service, but it's because the kids are back full time and we're no longer having free lunch from K-8. So there's that difference. And then there's a 15% of it is accounted for by staff. So when staff take leave, when we can't backfill with a direct hire, we have to go out through an agency hire, and that's a purchase service. And so that would account for the other part of that difference in purchase services.
So with our high schoolers in particular back full-time, that's where we were serving a lot of those meals to our high schoolers. This year, I know that, just to put this in there, as our kindergarten through 8th graders and those meals become fee-based again, we're already working with our food service director, Carol Buss, to start promoting that and finding ways to make sure that that's an easy process for our families.
And then the month imbalances here, as you see, you've seen this graphic before in months past. Just remembering, pointing out that April is a tax collection month, and so there's always a slight bump there. And then for the last 2 years in May, we've had the $2 million supposedly one time, 2 times in a row, enrollment stabilization funds that they came in May.
And again, just because this graph obviously shows up in our next presentation, this was at the end of June versus our presentation tonight is current.
And is the $2 million loan reflected in the fund balance at all?
No, it is not. The $2 million loan is reflected as an asset and a liability, and so it's not reflected on the cash flow that we're showing you tonight.
Thank you.
On the balance sheet that we'll see later, is that the same as the cash flow in terms of what we see for ending balances? Is it not?
Minus the $2 million. That's not included. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Not included.
And we have tried to, as you will see the next presentation, we have listed our assumptions next to the graph, so it's very clear and transparent what we're reporting on what and how. If we go to the next slide, this will actually show the numbers. Again, you've seen this type of data before. The first column is our prior year to date, and then our current year to date. And then if you move over to the right, our annual budget, for those of you who are not familiar with this report who might be listening, that's also our what's called the F-195. The annual budget is that what we set back in August of last year and adopted. And then the annual forecast is based on our lived experiences for this year, and it's an updated idea of where we think we will be at the end of the year. Okay, and so again, this is just showing the revenues by source. Budget, again, is that snapshot back in August of last year where we thought we'd be versus where we think we will be now at the end of August.
And can you talk just briefly about the forecast term can be misleading? We talked about
Yeah, it's our new projection.
New projection. So forecast, we oftentimes use projection, forecast and projection synopsis.
Yeah, and on the next slide, more of the expenditures. Again, here you're going to see salaries coming under the budget because there were some leaves. And so those didn't get filled in that column, but you will see that the purchase services are higher because when we have to go to an agency, it's going to show up in purchase services when it's not a direct hire and we're filling those positions.
So there is the quarterly report for closing out June. We're happy to take questions or listen in on your conversation and context.
I don't know if we want to wait and hear more pieces of the puzzle and then discuss the whole
Yeah.
thing. I think that would make more sense. So should we move on to, that was just for discussion, so should we move on to the next section? So board policy 1800 OE6, budgeting, financial planning, 2022-2023 budget, first reading. So this is this coming year's budget.
What we tried to do is at least create a hybrid based on the change and kind of gap in our CFO as Director Bergstrom left the district in July, and our new director who will be coming in, Director Sullivan, he won't be able to start until September. We created a hybrid for you this year of this first reading. It doesn't have the official guide to the budget that you might have seen in the past, but yet it's more than the shell that was provided. One of the things that I've already asked incoming Director Sullivan to do is part of his entry plan is to create the guide to the budget once he comes in and has an opportunity to get his arms around it. We always start with our budgeting and thinking about what are our division, the mission, the values, what do we stand for as a district. But I certainly want to meet for you two, and I want to acknowledge our finance team. If you could introduce, is Brenda in the attendee? There she is. Will you promote her, please?
Brenda, you'll see an invitation to join as a panelist. If you're available, if you wouldn't mind accepting. Looks like she's coming in.
Great. So since July 1, I've asked a lot of this team. When Director Bergstrom was leaving, we had the opportunity as a team to hire accounting coordinator to fill a vacant position. And as you'll see from the names on there, by the time Director Sullivan starts, we will have changed over 4 out of the 5 positions in the department, which might be viewed as a concern, and I view it as an opportunity. I think we have a real opportunity with people that we're bringing on, but these 2 leaders to my left, Dr. Booby and Director Battersby, in addition to their jobs, I've also asked them to essentially be co-interim finance directors to really shepherd this along and come alongside me and really help put this together. And so publicly thank both of you for your tireless effort. In a moment, I'll introduce a little bit more of Director Sullivan. He will be coming on board September 6th. We have 3 transition days, each of the next Wednesdays where he'll be in district. He's also been on some Zoom calls and doing other interactions with our team already. In fact, he helped support, as I alluded to in a board memo, to helping us with this. Another very important person who is the last person standing, if you will, in the department. And she doesn't oftentimes come to these meetings. In fact, she prefers not to be at these types of meetings and events. But it was important to me. Jackie Garcia Favre is someone that I've worked with in my 13 years. She's been in the district for 20 plus years, working as a budget coordinator. And we always talk about student data, and we say there's always a student behind those numbers. And when we talk about budget, there's a person behind those numbers who's really helped out all of our financial directors, but the ones I know of with Dean Mack and then Ty Bergstrom, and now will be Matt Sullivan. But Jackie, she cares deeply about this organization. She's emotional about this because she wants it right, and she expects a lot of herself, sometimes probably too much of herself. But we really appreciate everything that she's doing. And Jackie, thanks for being here tonight to help where we might stumble on some figures. The next person, Next is Brenda Semeraro. Brenda came to us in mid-June, or excuse me, mid-July. We were fortunate that Brenda was looking for a position when we were advertising one. She comes to us from New York, where she was a budget director and similar to a CFO in our roles for a small district outside the Syracuse area. And so she's come on board. She's learning new systems, but she understands the concepts of school finance. She's been a great partner already, stayed late at night with Jackie and the team putting together our budget. Brenda, it's great to have you in our school district. We're glad you moved here.
Thank you.
Welcome, Brenda.
Thank
And the
you.
other two who aren't here tonight, Tiffany Como and Christy Fan, they are our new purchasing and accounts payable. And then we've also been networking with NWRDC through technical support. And they are the kind of the back end of Skyward in our support. So want to acknowledge them. Director Sullivan will be coming in. I've spoken with him. I was clear when we were hired, when we were going through the hiring process with candidates. And I've been clear with Director Sullivan, and he's been actually ahead of me, already telling me what he thinks needs to be done as well. But we'll be looking at a full audit and analyzing all of our current budgets, our revenues, expenditures, and our position. There will be a plan developed to restore our fund balance in accordance with our expectations that I'll remind us all about tonight. We need a strategy and a timeline to repay our interfund transfer back to ourselves. We need to build a unified team of new individuals, establish new relationships and partnerships with our schools, our staff, our community. And certainly we want to amplify and elevate that trust in our financial management of our school district. It's a tall order for anyone to come in. Fortunately, he has experience in his district that he's leaving that was in a similar position 8 years ago when he joined there. And according to ESD and everyone else, is in excellent standing now.
Can we focus slide 3? Or 4?
There
Here we go.
One more. There's Matt. So they're coming in. So one more, Andrews. Always reminding ourselves of our fundamentals and our budget in alignment with our fundamentals as we're moving forward. And then later tonight, if you'll keep going, Andrews, later tonight, I will go over and answer questions on the communication plan that I presented you, which was part of my contract and my commitment to you as a school board. But I think an important part of our budget is it is a way of communicating to people about what our values are and what we're about. And it's also going to be important to communicate that it's not that we have cash, we have money, it's just not always in the right buckets. And we have to continue to think about how to move those around. And in the areas where we don't have it, where we can prioritize our spending. And that will be part of tonight's presentation. So with that, want to turn it over to Aaron to talk a little bit, Director Battersby, a little bit about enrollment. As a backdrop, obviously enrollment is our biggest driver of budget. So
yeah, so if you could advance one slide. Thank you. So you should be somewhat familiar with this slide as it was presented previously on August 7th. However, we have updated with the most recent information we had.
June 23rd.
June 23rd, sorry. We updated it with the most recent information we had on August 7th. So if you look at the green line, which is 22, 23, we're actually coming in a little bit higher than we were projecting, which is a good thing. So there is an adjustment there, but we continue to see sort of a downward trend in enrollment.
So questions on enrollment projections, because a little bit might be an understatement. In June, the projection, I believe, was 154 students greater than what we're projecting now. And what causes me some heartburn is that last year, our projections were off by about 170 students when we approved the budget versus what turned out to be the actual once classrooms were open and students showed up. So is this not repeating, and who knows what will happen in September, some of the same dangers and that we've already experienced?
So I think what's important to notice here, there's been two ways that enrollment trends have been presented to the board and that are conceived of. This is trends by student FTE. I think what you're referencing was a presentation that was based on head count. And we have several students who enroll partially, so partial enrollment. So if you were to advance to the next slide, you'll see the Les projections based on the Les Kendrick projections, and those are based on head count.
So sorry, what was before August 7th, what was the
So-
projection for this year? Can we just get that?
Yeah, so I think like what I have from the June 24th on slide 18 for 22-23 enrollment projections is 3,769.
Right. So those were projections by Director Bergstrom, based on what his calculations, based on his formulas were showing. As we've enrolled students throughout and actually went back in, our enrollment numbers are actually quite higher than what his projections are based on what's come in over the summer and who's been re-registering and coming back in. So while what I believe is that last year there was an over projection, and that was discussed at the board table. I think this is a reaction to not wanting to be over budget, but I believe that this is way under where we're actually going to come in based on the enrollments that we're seeing, all of our administrative assistants coming back to the buildings, new enrollments over the summer, and where we're trending. We're still not exactly with our projections. We are still projecting under where enrollment was if we were to start tomorrow, because we know families are going to come back and forget to have let us know that they're gone, and that happens each year. So there'll be a small fluctuation, but we're still enrolling kids every day.
But I guess my concern is, again, going back to last year's budget, 21-22, we over projected by 170 students, because the truth is these projections, particularly with volatile enrollment, there's a high degree of uncertainty until students actually show up for class.
Right.
And hopefully this is correct, or as close to accurate. I mean, correct isn't the right word, because projections are just that, projections. But by revising our enrollment upwards of 154 from what we saw in June, I worry, to quote Yogi Berra, it'll be like deja vu all over again. Right. And when, where we'll have a budget that's based upon 150 or 160, 170, who knows, students who don't matriculate and show up and we don't get funding.
But 3923 is actual right now, right?
Well,
So that's not a projected, that's an actual.
If they all walk through the door,
Well,
Yes.
they're enrolled.
they're.
Yeah, there are people who are enrolled, correct.
So
And they-
So this isn't
This is
These
why it
are
was
kids
updated.
as long as they show
Names
up.
As long as they show up.
It's
Yes.
not butts and seats, but it's names on lists.
Names on lists who's actually gone.
And
through
what
the
was it
process.
like? Do we know what it was last year?
I don't have that exact one, and I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback too much, but I believe we could have made adjustments sooner about this. Our projections sooner than we did.
Okay, because, obviously the question for me is, if this is based on actual enrollment, last year, why wasn't it based on actual enrollment?
I think we could have done a better job correcting enrollment sooner than what happened.
So when we made the projection at the time, we were still in the throes of COVID. So the assumption was that more kids were going to come back
Than
actually did. So
Well,
that's
they
why
didn't actually enroll. I mean, we still had actual enrollment. I mean, all those timelines are the same.
I think there were families that trying to keep all their bases covered, so they signed up with the district and they also had a private school and they waited till last minute to call. I know some families like that. I just wanted to ask a question though. This, when you talk about like kids on lists, names on lists, that doesn't include people like myself who have failed to fill out like the RSVP form for this year, right? Like if your kid was enrolled last year, we're counting them.
You're not that delinquent. I just- You're okay, you're not on the naughty list.
Okay.
You know, we know a lot of that, and we kind of have a sense of when they come back. We'll see a surge in high school right before fees and photos.
Right.
When
Okay.
everyone feels like that's the deadline, we get it, that's okay, but these are families who, you know, they've registered for classes. You know, we've got them on lists, and there'll be some families who have moved and forgot to let us know, or you know, something, you know, their new enrollment, their new school hasn't opened, so they haven't contacted us. So that's why we're still being a little bit cautious with that, and we're not budgeting to the new reality. We're not going right up against it. We're still leaving cushion there.
So is it fair to say this is good news? We're just gonna wait. We're
Great.
it's really, really excellent news. We're just waiting to see those kids walk in the door before we go.
And I'll tell you that kindergarten is a huge surprise for us this year. We weren't sure kind of where they were coming in the spring. Director Bergstrom and Superintendent Koloski had decided that we would scale it back to 190 as projection for elementary. And we are projecting right now 237 if they all walked in the door tomorrow. So that's where some of that's happening, where I think that projections were very conservative. And we're just trying to bring it back into a little bit more reality, but also leaving a cushion just to make sure.
I apologize, Director Phillips, I misunderstood your question earlier. But it said that these are previously shared numbers, but the green line is updated based on the registrations that we have. So this should be the 3923 should be a more accurate depiction of who actually shows up. But this is not people who are obviously butts and seats.
And I guess I'm saying, and I guess the summary is that we have greater confidence this year than we did last year.
Correct.
And it's so many variables. It's, you know, kindergarten, I'm sure, is bumped up because they're vaccinated now. And, you know, I mean, and last year we were hoping things would happen and they didn't. I think it's, I hope that, I mean, looking at these numbers, I'm actually thinking that it looks good. That last year was more of an anomaly. I think what Dr. Grundle's saying in terms of, you know, correcting those enrollment numbers, adjusting them sooner would probably have been more prudent, but hopefully the anomalies are behind us for.
Also, enrollment tends to go up as the economy goes down. You know, we notice some of that over too. So.
And we tend to grow in the number of students, which proved to be the case last year over the course of the year.
Oh, that's fairly nominal. I mean, relative.
It's nominal, but we don't tend to see declines in our district. Other districts, that is not the case. You know, it depends on a lot of demographic factors. So we're either stable or nominal increase. So I'm not, you know, I'm not losing sleep thinking we're going to go backward once the school year starts based on my time.
And if you could advance it one more. Thank you, perfect. And this is just, again, going back to the headcount projections. Again, you'll see that we're actually doing a little bit better than we were projecting, but we did have a very conservative projections. And again, that is based on our August 7th Skyward enrollment. So that's what the actual data that we had. So we did adjust based on that. You'll see that with the little red line and dot, dash line and dot. But I will say that obviously you saw an accelerated decline based on as compared to the projections that we had by our demographer, and that's attributable to COVID. You're the next slide. So again, this is just a more detailed graph of our projected versus actual in terms of enrollment. The 21-22 projected, to your point, Director Glowitz, we missed our projections pretty significantly last year. So the base is the readjusted, if you recall, and I think it was October, November, Director Bergstrom readjusted projections. So the projected that you see here is the readjustment, not the big miss that I would say occurred in the fall, in the September. So right now, again, we're at 3,923.03 is our actual as compared to our projection, which was 3,880, so it is higher. So assuming they all show up as they're enrolled in Skyward, we will be better than we projected.
So I get what projected means last year, which doesn't mean projected from budget, which is really, where sort of the rubber meets the road, not what projected is once we see butts and seats. What does the projected mean this year? Because it looked like, to me, when I see the actual 3,923, that's what our updated projected is, and then the actual will be whatever it is when like school opens.
So what we've done, and as recently as 3 nights ago, that 3,880 was down at that, I think 37, whatever that figure, the 3,700 and change.
Yeah.
We as a team decided, and future Director Sullivan was part of it, of 3,880 seems to be much more reasonable, even though 3,923 are enrolled. What if some of those students haven't told us that they're coming back, or they partially enroll? There is that buffer right there to account for any sort of change. If we do end up with those students, then that's positive for our future financial picture as we start talking about regrowing fund balance and looking at strengthening our position.
So when it comes to
overall.
revenue, are we basing it on the 3,880 or?
Yes,
Yes.
380.
Okay.
And just for people who are watching, what's the date that the state kind of takes like a snapshot of how many students we have in classes?
October 1st.
October 1st.
But the caveat on that is October 1st is what they start funding us on. There's a true up in January, where if you're under in January, then you're getting less for the rest of the year. If you're over, you get more. So you also want to make sure that October 1 date and your January date are talking to each other. Just kind of putting it out there, the difference there is about 400,000 in terms of the 3,923 versus the 3,880 in revenue.
Because for each student,
We calculated about 9,850, somewhere right there. We'll get updated numbers soon, but that's about what we're doing right now.
Back to me for revenues and expenditures. So a revenue outlook. So ongoing revenue, as some of you may know, the legislature passed a 5.5 IPD. That increases the monies that we'll receive by 1.5 million for personnel and about 500,000 for our materials, our IPSOC budget, materials and supplies. There's an additional funding for SEL staffing allocation. This is money this year we've been typically paying ourselves, so that's an additional $430,000 increase. Technology reimbursements and transfers. We originally had a 200,000 budgeted for that. That is now 250 actually, so I'll update that for you on the slide deck. One-time revenue, the levy enrollment stabilization per pupil rate increase and a per pupil rate increase. So it's about 500,000 EPNO. And then of course we have the 2 million enrollment stabilization that we've already talked about. And then our enrollment is slightly ahead of our projections.
is it 500,000 or 847? Like there's a slide further down where it says like EP&O stabilization, sort of looking forward. Once that stabilization comes off, and like that was
On the
like-
expenditure outlook.
Yeah.
That's more on the EP&O, that's more on the levy side.
Mhm.
So that's, we'll talk about that in terms of the EP&O levy itself versus the general fund coming out of the state.
Well, I'm talking about like on this slide, on slide 12, is a levy enrollment stabilization.
Oh,
500,000, but I thought that was really closer to 847.
the 847 is what we're gonna lose
Yeah.
in the 23-24. We've gained a little bit this year, but by the time we get out to 24, and that's what that other graph will show, is that's where we start going down because we can no longer use the 1920 student.
You know, I
numbers.
get that, but like, I guess my point is, and it's only like, 300,000. But, you know, the EP&O is what, 2,742 per student based on the 1920 enrollment numbers. Like, to me, like, when I pencil that out, like, that's closer to the 800 than the 500,000, which is reflected later on. So I'm just,
Got it.
it doesn't have to be like clarification,
But
like, those
dig into
numbers
that.
don't net.
We just make a note of that.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I also want to take this time, because I think it speaks to William and Kristen's points earlier on. To the point of that 5.5%, as a reminder, the state has their prototypical school model. And so when the legislature approved that 5.5%, we get an additional amount of money to our material supplies and operating costs. So we get a 5.5% bump there because they know that everything's costing more for us. We also get 5.5%, but that's not on every single employee in the district. That's only on the employees that the state funds. That doesn't include anyone who's a federal or paid about federal dollars for special education. It doesn't pay for anyone that we have paid for out of a levy. And if there were any local, this isn't as much as anymore, but if let's say a PTA paid for an extra para, none of that is money we receive from the state. That is all money we have to come up with within the confines of the levy itself. So that's kind of why it's not as simple as the state said 5.5. Here's the 5.5 pass through. That's why it's a lower number if we apply it across the board. And the second question from Kristen, and it's good to see both of you, and Kristen, well, good to see you back as always on the ELL side. In terms of the money, it's been called a lot of different things. So some have called it the SEL bill, some have called it the nurses bill. Remembering that it can include counselors, psychologists, nurses. There's a broad range that was defined by the legislature. We're fortunate to have Representative Sen, who was a big sponsor of that bill in representing us. But that 430,000 will go up each of the next 2 years. But when you look at our staffing already, we're outspending by far using our levies. So that 430,000 isn't real money for us because we've already spent that money by having a nurse in every school, by having more school psychologists and those ratios. I wish that it would be true revenue coming in, but it really just takes over for some of the levy. And with the levy going down, we're going to be offset by that in the long term, unfortunately.
Thank you.
So I'm going to address sort of the expenditure outlook. Again, I think one of you have already highlighted that we will be needing to make a $2 million, not $200 million, I apologize, $2 million repayment.
I'm out of here.
$2 million repayment from the general fund to the cap tech levy, and that's what we borrow basically from ourselves. So it's moving money from one fund to the other, but we are obligated to repay that, and that's something we have to do within this year. We can't delay that. The next piece is we did receive 5.5 IPD, which was spoken to in the early side. What?
I forgot we were covering that right here, so keep going.
Oh, that's okay. IPD increase, and that only applies to state funded positions. So again, it's based on the prototypical school model, and as we've shared, we do staff much higher than the prototypical school model, which is typical of schools. So a 5.5 IPD increase is about 1.52 million from the state, which is only a 3.2 increase for all staff. So that's how that translates down. So we get 5.5, and 1.52, if we were to give it all away, is a 3.2% increase, not a 5.5% increase.
So I have a question, maybe it's later, but the repayment of the interfund loan. Like pursuant to statute, it can only be for 1 year.
Correct.
But yeah, we're showing a budget that has a deficit. But not as deficit, we'll be negative. So presumably we would have to take out another interfund loan if we pass the budget as presented. does that not violate the requirement to refinance a loan that's only a year with a subsequent loan in order to pay it off?
So we were on the phone with OSBI and the ESD, having these exact conversations. And that's been part of our outreach. In our conversation today, as recently as this morning with the ESD, they were talking about all kinds of ways and strategies. We can pay off our current interfund transfer and then take out another one going forward. So there are some things that we can do. The one thing we can't do is pass a general fund budget. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. You can't pass a general fund budget that's in the negative, and that's why we have A and B, and we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation, unless you go into a special designation where you're basically closely monitored. We'll talk about that a little bit, but unlike other areas, you actually can take more than, through resolution, you can take out another loan against yourself as you're going through it.
Won't we be in the negative? Like when I looked at the.
Yes.
ending fund balance?
Well,
Can-
yes, and we'll get to that in a second. Hold that thought.
So I just, the other, just for transparency for all those who watch, I know everyone here at all you directors know, but both of our contracts are currently open and we are actively bargaining. So that is something to take into consideration. Any other questions? So looking at this, our EP&O levy collection authority from 23 to 24, it's going to actually be going down by $847,711. And this is in part, or this is based on the fact that we can no longer rely on the 2019 enrollment numbers, which is what we have been doing for the past 2 years. Our legal and public record request costs have been accelerating, and we're not necessarily anticipating that declining. We have made internal adjustments to try to take more in-house, but it's still a cost that we can't necessarily project to be going down. The other piece is with inflation, our commodities and contracts have been increasing over time, fuel prices, supplies, utility, and our service contracts, and we cannot predict that they're not going to stay high or continue to go up. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to have staffing levels to match our student enrollment. So we will be looking at right sizing ongoing, which is what we did in the last 2 years as well.
So if we take a look here, this is a way of looking at enrichment programs and operations levy. The EP&O levy, unlike capital and technology levy, it rolls right into the general fund. So trying to help people to remember how the different levies work. A levy for transportation exists as its own entity. The levy for our capital and our capital tech and projects exists as its own bucket, but the EP&O money flows into the general fund. That's important, of course, because that's what we're trying to pay a number of salaries out of and other operating costs. So what we put together for you here is to look over time. And what makes this chart confusing, but what we've tried to help clarify for everyone is that remembering that levies are collected by calendar year, but our school year always goes across years. So our authorized levy authority, you can see in the maroon, kind of goes across. We're going to see that bump in the 2023 year. And remembering that we collect in April and October. And so we're projecting right up against our cap, which was approved by our taxpayers at 12 million. And then you can see in the blue, we're showing how that kind of translates over the school years, because of course we're going to enter the 22-23 school year. So this past April, we collected the 4 million. I lost the digit there, or some digits there, but the 4,500,000, and that then is roughly is it the spring that we get 40?
It's 40%, it's 60% in the spring, 40% in the fall.
Bits. And so then you can kind of see that it's going to start coming back down because of what Director Battersby just mentioned. And then we showed the difference that we're going to go slightly up and then we're going to come down sharply. The legislature approved, if we recall from the legislative session, 2023 would be the last year where we collect on the 1920 figures. This slide is important because it helps us to remember that what we're doing today will have impacts in the outward years as we're restoring our budget. And two other footnotes, just a pre-McCleary 2017, we were collecting as much as almost 17 million in the EP&O levy. That's when it was based on property value. Now we collect based on students because of where we fall in the fund or in the formula. And then just noting that half there, and I apologize, we forgot some digits there, is the combined total. We were just seeing half of it for the back end of 22.
And I suppose just for a little bit of loss, that I assume that 16.9 million isn't inflation adjusted. So for inflation adjusted,
It will be much
even greater.
Yeah, and we were still benefiting by the 4% levy lift, they called it. If you recall, in the recession, the legislature allowed districts to go to their taxpayers and ask for a 4% lift above what the state was. And that went back to numbers that were set in the 70s that were part of a levy equalization act. And so we were collecting that too with that, just for historical purposes.
So the next slide, we're just gonna look at staffing. Can you advance one more? As you know, we have reduction in forces in a reduction in force for the last 2 years. So you can see that our staffing numbers have been going down pretty consistently. One thing that I do want to highlight is you'll see that the district multi-building has gone up, and that's not necessarily more people. It's people that have been pulled out from being assigned to just one school to being assigned to multiple schools, which most often happens with our special services staff. But this trend of decline is likely to continue should we continue to see declining enrollment.
The high school seems to be an outlier in that. Is that
Because the high school numbers haven't gone down yet. It's elementary that's gone down so much.
We still have the bubble of students that are sitting in our high school that were that bubble when we were wanting to build new elementary schools. Because that we're still up in the 340s, 350s. It's that group that's now coming into the middle school. I think our 8th grade is kind of the last of the bubble years. Starting with our current 8th graders, that's kind of going to be the end. So our high school is going to stay pretty constant with theirs for another year, and then they will start seeing a gradual drop down as well. So looking at fund balance and cash flow, I'm just going to take the first part and then turn it over to Director Boobie. Just as a reminder for all of us, you have 2 core expectations of me as the superintendent, and then vis-a-vis the staff. The first is that we continue to develop compensation and benefit plans that are ones that we can attract and maintain quality staff. Those are our bus drivers, as William's here tonight. Those are our nurses. Those are our teachers, certainly our administrators as well. Our grounds, our custodian, everyone across the board. We want to make sure that we've got great people in our organization. And the other part is the expectation you have that we start looking at returning back to that 8% with a target of 10% on the fund balance. And then as you passed at the end of last year, if we're below 5%, we need plans about how we're going to rebuild this. And that's what I outlined that Director Sullivan and myself will be keenly pointed towards. And then the other is if we get when we get above that 5%, if we ever choose to come back below, we come to the board with a plan about that and an expectation. So I frame that because as we now start to look at what our new reality is based on what we've learned in the last month and putting this together, we've got our work cut out for us, but I am optimistic and very confident in the team we have that we can do this.
Okay, so this is the month by month actual expenditures and revenue, including our June actual. So you've seen this already in the June report. This is just month by month. What I will draw your attention to is the net cash flow towards the bottom there and the fund balance. And so we are, as we shown in the June quarterly report, we are underspending our budget right now by about 2.3 million. We were expected to only have $471,000 in the fund balance at the end of the year based on the F-195 adopted budget last year. So we had adopted a budget that spent down $5 million. So we are actually coming up above that projected on this report at $2 million at the end of August. Now, that news is even better. If we go to the next slide, I'll give a shout out to the SPED department and the hard work that my team has done in special services, as well as all of the teachers in recouping as much money as we can from the safety net process. That is for those of you who are unfamiliar with safety net, is a way for special services to recapture monies for students who cost more than the prototypical model. So in this case, it's more than about $35,000. We can apply to the state for additional funding. In years past, we have done really well. This year, we continue to do really well. I had worked with Ty and budgeted $900,000 to come back to the district. We actually, as of this morning, just got our letter that we will have 1.41 million coming back to the district. And so that's an additional 500,000 and change that we are going to get to add to our cash flow balance that is not on this sheet at the moment, which will help us tremendously as we end the school year. The other thing to note on that graph, Andres, before we move on, is year over year here through COVID, our expenditures have outpaced our revenue. And as we just cannot continue, and the board's already pointed that out to us, we are keenly aware that we cannot continue that deficit model into the future and meet the board expectations. So again, here, we saw the slide on the quarterly report. We have the tax base coming in April. We have the $2 million bump in May for the enrollment stabilization. And so now you can see that the end balance is going up because one, we had projected 900,000 as for safety net to be in there, but now it's coming up above that. So it'll be more like 2.5 million. So I should add that 2.5 million would increase the fund balance to a 3.62% versus the 2.79 that we put on the June report. And that is because we got those numbers this morning and the quarterly report had already been finished.
But for context, for those that may be listening in, I believe neighboring school districts are, in all cases, I think, for the most part, like above our 3.6%. I think like Washington is around 10%. Bellevue might be 5.5%. Seattle school district gets a lot of federal funding. Is it like 15% from what I saw? But I think no district is as low as we are.
We are probably one of the lowest in the Puget Sound Educational Service District. And I've heard numbers as high as approaching 20% fund balance. And we would probably be on the low end. Factors on that, a big one was the ESSER funds. And, the lack of ESSER funds for us really put us at a disadvantage because we still had students who needed support too. But because of the way the formulas worked, we didn't see that. And then, we made some intentional decisions coming out of COVID that we wanted to spend down fund balance. As Director Booby said, as we all acknowledge, that delta can't continue. And that's what we're here to start working on.
I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around it. The 2.5 million in fund balance now that they anticipated. Are we subtracting out 2 million?
Nope.
So that's,
Yes, and we'll talk
it's
about
still at
this.
2.5. I mean,
It's
it's
still
2.5 even after the payback.
No, I mean, it's not, the payback is not factored in, because that's an asset and liability. This is simply fund balance. So
Even though this is general fund?
this is general fund. And the asset and liability won't show up here.
So our real fund balance is less than 1%.
Yes.
We're talking like
Once we pay
2/3
ourselves
of a
back.
percent.
Once we pay ourselves.
Right,
Okay.
that's what, so it is like 500,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so let's look at the context slide, which is the next one. So financial outlook and, you know, my recommendations and thoughts of where we are. After obviously a lot of work with the team and reflection. Yes, we have a declining enrollment, but it's at a decreasing rate compared to projection. And we talked a little bit about that. We have this $2 million capital project loan repayment that is due back to ourselves, hanging over us. Our beginning fund balance, as Director Boobie just mentioned, we're looking at approximately 2.544 million, which is 3.62%. This includes, as Director Boobie just mentioned, this morning's good news of a little over $500,000 in safety net reimbursements, which was unbudgeted. The state calculated our inflationary increase at 5.5%, and those are the factors there. Obviously, it doesn't apply, as we mentioned, to federally and levy funded positions nor local. Our district costs are going up, district staffing, and to a lesser degree, costs are still not right sized. There's anticipated expenditures outpacing anticipated revenues, which is showing up here, which is the cause certainly for concern, especially with the $2 million repayment. So if we look at the next slide, kind of getting into some thoughts, there's a negative delta that you see, and Suann is going to go over that in a second. There's a negative delta, and we provided you kind of an A and B scenario there between our general fund revenues and our expenditures. Obviously, those cuts that we had done and the reductions were still not enough to reverse that trend. So we've got some strategic work with the current budget that we've been doing since late July on into up to the current date to try to get the most accurate projections possible. And then spending the last several weeks, Brenda and Jackie, Suann, Aaron, myself, Matt, really looking at how do we strategically budget and create a comprehensive review of everything we have. We closed what was a multi-million-dollar gap when we first ran the report. Even going into the weekend, we've closed it down to just under 200,000. We've done that by looking at all of our expenditures, reducing everything we possibly can think of. There is some wiggle room left in there that we're going to talk about, but I think it's important for transparency that you as a board know, and the community knows, and our staff knows, and most importantly, the students, that our team has not been working in isolation. We've been transparent with OSPI and connecting with them. We've been transparent with the ESD, working with John Welch and Jolie Valentino, who heads up the budget team, WASBO, certainly you as a board, and then including Matt as our incoming CFO. So as we present these kind of A and B, and then what we think we can go from there, it's not something that this team's taking lightly. It's not something that this team, you know, it weighs heavily on us, but we are optimistic about where we could be, not only in the coming year, but in future years as we really come back into the financial standing that we've been in historically. So with that, Suann.
Do you offer those?
Oh, I guess I should do my recommendations. So we have the general fund recommendation. My recommendation is that we go back and you know, you can certainly send us back too, but our plan would be to go back and one more slide. Yeah. That we go back and we close that deficit so that we presented to you a balanced budget on August 25th. It's going to negate the 21-22 gains made in fund balance. That is the positive, but this would allow Director Sullivan and myself time with the team, with outside entities to really do a full-scale audit in the first quarter of the school year, which is not the first quarter of the fiscal year for the other world. We've got to work closely with the ESD to restore our budget. We need to continue to make mid-year adjustments and strategize about what that would look like in 22-23, so that our ending fund balance and our district financial position improves. Certainly that we're identifying further budget inefficiencies or where we're not taking advantage of options that may be at our fingertips, and certainly developing a comprehensive plan to further adjust staffing and expenditures for 23, 24 and beyond. So as you listen to the presentation, both A and B show a deficit. They're a different deficit. My recommendation is that you send us back to work, we close that, bring you a balanced budget, and then we start building from there. Sue-Ann.
Okay, so if we go to budget A, and we're trying to be completely transparent, as you know, we're working through and thinking about this, and so instead of just showing you the second budget, I wanted to show our thinking as we've been moving through here. So this is the 3880 FTE. We know we already talked about student enrollment, and that right now we have a like 3923 student or FTE for student enrollment, but we're trying to stay conservative. So this is the first assumption on this chart. The additional safety net funds that we heard today, we had not had when I had run this report. So that is not on there. And then this is also assuming that our expenditures, when we close out August, still come in 2 million under budget. And so there's a few assumptions with this. And so with this, we were able to close the gap to a little less than $650,000 in change. And so then going back to the drawing board a little bit, we kept the 3880. We added in budget B entries. Thank you. We added the additional unbudgeted safety net, and we're still assuming that our expenditures are going to be coming in 2 million under budget. And that got us closer this morning, but we still have a ways to go. And I will say we have, as Fred said, we have been going through our MSOC budgets and looking to see where we can spend under what we had already projected. Really looking at our staffing model to see if there's any wiggle room there. We actually performed a full audit of all of our staff, making sure our budget sheets and our HR sheets and our fiscal sheets all were in alignment, and then we matched them all back to what's in the computer system, and closed out all of those accounting errors or human errors, and that also helped us close the gap at performing that audit. And so within the next 2 weeks, our goal is to continue to pull our leadership together and to look hard at where else we can cut, so that we can come back with a balanced fund. We are not going to be able in 2 weeks to close that $3 million gap between expenditures and revenue, but we will have an ending fund balance in the black positive.
With the 2 million interfund.
So now, as we go to it, so now we'll go ahead, Sue.
No, the interfund loan is not on that. So we would need that ending fund balance to be over 2 million in order for us. So we would have to close the revenue expenditure gap to less than $1 million in order to do that. So it's really 2 plans. The first plan is just to be able to get this budget where the fund balance is not negative. The second goal is to work with Matt Sullivan when he gets here to perform a serious audit and to really look at how to close that and pay back that 2 million.
Second question, like I noticed that when it comes to the fees, what is it called here? Under revenues, tuition fees, gifts, fines, interest, that's almost $800,000 more, I believe, than last year. Like what accounts for an $800,000 increase in expected revenue for that line item?
I would have to look into that one.
Yeah, I would exactly kind of where that is. I would need to look in and probably consult with Jackie on what we were anticipating different next year from this year.
I think it was 4.7 when I looked at last year.
Some of it might be the way that we're anticipating potential revenue from schools foundation and what year it would be. So we'll look into it.
And does ASB funding fall in that too?
So we have the other budgets that we can talk about in a minute, transportation and ASB and so forth. Is there any other questions on this one? Okay.
No, of course, I just wondering if that fell into tuition fees, gifts, fines, but it doesn't.
It's a totally different one.
Yeah. All right, Fred, transportation expenditures.
Just reminding, we made a decision last year, you did as a board, we did as a team, to not run the transportation levy. And so as predicted, the bulk of that remaining money with our new purchases is now brought down to that 200,000 mark. Obviously, we're still above there, but as we start contemplating our next potential levy, obviously then that would go right back up. But that's why, you see that where it is now, we've got those buses coming.
Okay. So debt service is going to hold steady at with an ending balance of 5.3 million. You can see the levy collections on there. The capital projects fund expenditures. So this, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a fund which the proceeds from the bond sales and capital levies are deposited and used.
And our next presentation, which is far more exciting than
Yeah.
this one, we'll get to talk about how we're spending that
Yes,
money.
yes, so
So they get to be the heroes.
Yeah, we'll let
coming in
them-
after.
Yeah, we'll let them explain all of that. And then Director D'Souza, ASB fund expenditures is kept separate, and then that is the,
So we entered the year with $12 million, $15 million in the capital projects fund balance. So we didn't spend last year's levy collection. Is that what happened?
So we'll have, where we plan to be after we complete all these projects is down to 7 million, almost 8 million there. And then that's why we have those other, in the next cycle, we already have those other pieces. This was brought up, I think, last year where we did have a large amount in that fund, as I recall the conversations at our table. And so that was part of what was giving us confidence we could do the South Mercer playfields and we could do some of those others. We will still predict that we're going to have some funds. I know that Tony's got lots of ways that he would like to spend this, so does Andrews on the technology side. So we've got conversations about that, absolutely.
And these expenditures right now happen this year.
Some of them are realized in last year's budget, but a lot of them will be realized in this coming year's budget. So things that, projects that are carrying over a couple of years, how are we going to be spending that money and when does it show up based on the timeline of the project?
Can we go back to what it means to be closely monitored? If we have a negative ending, general fund balance.
So if you present a negative budget to the ESD, because after the board approves the budget, we have till September 2nd, then to get it to the ESD, and then they have till the 9th to certify it and get it to OSBI. What happens is we go into, can you help me with the term? It's a new one for me.
oh, yeah, it's a monitoring. Trying to think what they called it.
There's a term while you're looking for it. It's in my other notebook. Basically, they don't come in and take over, but they come in and you have to have a repayment plan, a binding, it's a binding agreement, basically.
A binding position.
Thank you. What's the timeline? How are we going to do this? What does this look like? And how do we, get back based on that? It isn't something that happens often. Kent School District, if you recall, several years ago, is a recent example of one. Shoreline is another. And I don't call those out because, you know, they're doing anything wrong or whatnot. They hit their own struggles just like we are. So it would be the ESD coming in and meeting with us more frequently, but it's basically a binding agreement with the ESD about how we're going to restore it.
Okay. So it does look like that those people who said that we would be maybe insolvent this year, a year ago, were correct. Like from a general fund balance.
I think from a general fund balance perspective, because the cuts weren't made as deep, which was also brought up, and I realized that without those cuts being deep enough, that's creating our challenge of where we are now as we move forward. The thing I would say on that, though, one more thing is not to say right and wrong, but again, we have money. It's just not in the right place. But you're right, from the general fund perspective, that's the challenge on that one. That's why we have the loan repayment, but obviously it doesn't spring, it doesn't just spring you forward. We've got some work to do.
I mean, like we were cash flow insolvent 6 months ago. Now we're balance sheet on a general fund insolvent currently.
Yeah, and my full focus with this team certainly is going to be working forward to get us towards 10% one day. And if it's 1% by next month and 3% by next year, we'll come with a plan.
I also think there's value now in a new team coming together, and it will be like an external audit, and to look at this with fresh eyes and explain it to everybody with fresh eyes. So I think there's lots of value as we're looking forward to on this. So I appreciate the hard work and the shared understanding of this budget that you as a leadership team have and that you presented to us today. I think it's a very difficult discussion to have, exposing our dirty laundry in quite a number of ways. It's good to understand your problem and to know the details of your problem so you can make progress on solving it. And I very much appreciate that work that was done and the transparency that you are showing repeatedly throughout this. So thank you very much.
I want to thank you for that, because I totally agree. But I think that we need these constant reminders of, with our schools, 80% of our budgets are people. And, I think human nature, all of us, we care about all of our people and want to lose as few as possible. But we know that as our enrollment goes down and our state funding is based on per student, that I said enrollment going down, right? Not funding. Enrollment based on per student, we have to lose staff, and it hurts and no one wants to do it. And, what one could say insolvent and one could say we're trying to figure out a way to keep as many people as we can. And so, we have to find that balance. And I think that communicating it, we will find that balance. It's a question of how many staff we're going to lose in the future based on how many students that we have. And so it's that balance of trying to do best for everyone, or trying to do right by everyone, making sure that our students' needs are met and making sure that our staff is valued and that we are not sacrificing careers so that we can have a bigger fund balance. So I appreciate the openness and just keeping in mind that that we have to work together to find this balance that works for our community.
I also wanted to say that I very much appreciate the creative financing, and I don't mean that as like a euphemism or illegal financing, but turning over every rock looking for reimbursements and so forth.
I would appreciate that. And we know, I've been talking to Matt and again, Waswell, there are some places for us to dig deeper.
Great.
But Matt needs to do that when he gets here. And so we are making a list and we are looking. And don't want to, while we're waiting on Matt to come on board, to make those decisions. So we're trying in transparency to get to a balance so we can submit and approve, knowing that we will come up with a new projected budget after we have done the audit.
And knowing that there's no magic wand, there's no one reimbursement that's.
Unless you're gonna write a check for $6 million.
Right. Most likely, no.
What happens if a budget isn't approved?
Well, we have till August 31st. We notify the ESD that we couldn't, we talked to OSPI about this earlier this week. It's not completely unheard of, that we have to basically get legal permission from OSPI to keep it open, is what it sounds like. I've never, they didn't teach me that in superintendent school, so I gotta brush up on those skills. But that's what it sounds like, is it's gonna require, it would require OSPI giving us authority.
And Tam, I see that your hand is up.
Thank you. Fred, can you show me the slide about the projected balance again? I have just a clarification question. Because I know on one of the slides, you said that we, in the last year, we under, okay, this one, yes. And how we come in under budget with our expenditure, and historically we have always done that. And then this budget is, we're projecting, the expenditures, and what we're projecting is a lot more than what we're bringing in. But if people are looking at this and they said that historically we have always been under budget, well, we have always underspent our expenditure based on what we project as our budget. Are we sure that what you're projecting for expenditure is as close as possible? And I am hearing that you are trying to do that by, looking at all to make sure that all of your budget from different departments are aligned up together and things like that. But I think it's just part of the trust is just to, for people, if they see historically that, this is, it's not a scare tactic, but, this is kind of a very dire, serious situation. But then if in the next couple of months we show, or as we're going through this, we show that we are not really spending all of our expenditure, it doesn't, people get confused. So I just want to clarify those two different pieces that I've been hearing. And if you can further explain that for me.
Sure, I'll speak to it a little bit, and then Sue-Ann, you might have even a different way to look at it, using kind of more your mathematical mind on that. In the best of times, it's typical that a school district will certainly adopt a budget that is, shows greater anticipated expenditures. That keeps from having to come back to you at the board to get resolutions to spend, but you generally don't wind up there. As you're trying to keep your fund balance up in that 6, 8, 10%, there's all, in order to do that, you have to make sure that your expenditures are coming in, or your revenues are coming in and outpacing your expenditures, so you can kind of stay in that threshold. That's the best way to do that. So I agree with you, Director Din, it's not a scare tactic. What's different now is that, even the gains that we made last year, which is the current, which ends August 31st, of that 2.5 million, the last year you approved 400 and change.
Yeah, 400.
And so we actually did better. We were able to reduce some spending, but it's really getting eaten up because we also have to do a payment. We had to take, there was a fund payment or a fund transfer on that. So anyone take a different run at that, or?
I think sometimes the expenditures, historically Mercer Island has had a nice budget, and we've been able to keep a fund balance. And so when you look at projecting into the future, we've always spent $150,000 in this account every year, right? So we're really taking a hard look now of what the expenses have been in each of those accounts and going, okay, you've had 150,000. Typically, you only spend 50,000. So why the heck are we budgeting 150,000 for that? And so we've done a first skim. We're going back and doing a second look at each of those accounts. And the MSOC budgets especially have increased, but it's hard to predict all of the staff or the increases in fuel costs and running each of the programs too. So we're still trying to keep it realistic. Because I'd rather go under budget than over on that piece. but also want to be honest about it and transparent about it. So we are taking some hard
And
looks
then
at it.
No, I really appreciate that. Oh, yeah. I really appreciate that because sometimes when we talk about right sizing, we only look at teachers and the salary. But the fact that you're going through systemically through all the departments and making sure that things that we always traditionally had in the budget, you know, if it's really what is needed for that department or that group to do the work for the district. So I appreciate that you're taking that larger systemic look at right sizing the whole system.
And I mean, I would say like, actually this past year, like when we were projecting 400,000 ending fund balance, and we really, in actuality, right, have $544,000 ending fund balance.
Right.
Once you take out the interfund loan. So it's exactly the same, but we got 2 million in enrollment stabilization dollars and $870,000 in levy stabilization dollars. So we actually were overly optimistic by 3.8 million or $2.8 million. So no, like we weren't overly negative. We were overly optimistic by a bit, like between like the projected and the actual.
So Dan, I don't think we're disagreeing at
Yeah,
all.
I'm just like, I'm trying to, so
Yeah.
everyone like sort of understands like the position that we're in now for the general public.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And, again, we're trying to be as transparent as possible and with, with staffing being 85% of our cost, it is going to be a tough look going into the future. And so right now we can't look at staffing really because contracts are signed and things are promised as we move forward. So there are certain places we can look. There are steps we can move into the future, but again, we want to make sure Matt and the full team is here and that we're doing it in a very methodical and thoughtful process and not trying in the next 2 weeks to make those really tough decisions. The tough decisions we have to make right now is how can we get it to a positive fund balance and then come back to this board with a very comprehensive plan in the future. One that we have thought through that has been vetted by Matt and the team and something that we know we can hold ourselves accountable to.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. If people don't have other comments right now, I'd love to move on and hear about the capital projects and then take a break for our group to address this 5. So
Just next steps, so everyone is clear. 2 weeks from tonight is a public hearing where public will have a chance to weigh in on what they've heard, what they've seen, and have opinions. At that point, what we will bring back is a balanced budget on the general fund side, understanding the complexities of what we've described tonight. If it's approved at that point, it goes to the ESD, then down to the state. In that process is when Matt starts and we hit the ground running. And kind of going back to just recapping, we've set out some really clear expectations and Matt has clear expectations of himself. And we're excited to have him on board. But we wouldn't be here tonight with this ability to kind of describe at this granular level without Brenda and Jackie, the whole team, Aaron's team on the HR side with Rosie and Kathleen. I really want to thank everyone for coming together and under some really challenging times, putting together the best projections and the most honest picture possible. So, with that, we'll.
is everybody ready to move on? Okay, so on the agenda, this is listed as can we like stretch break for the board? Just like stretch for a minute.
Cross your midline.
This is the OT.
It's not easy stretch, is it?
I know it's not. Okay. On the agenda, this is listed as board policy 1800 OE11 facilities and capital assets summer 2022 project update. So
Great, thank you.
Always have great pictures.
much more fun to look at.
Much more fun to look at. I will just say before we start that I've had the privilege of working with Matt Sullivan at Vashon Island School District for the last 5 years. And I have never in my 30 years worked with a more competent CFO. Hands down, the tightest business office, just extremely competent. So I'm thrilled that he's coming to join Mercer. It'll be a very good thing. Okay. You've all seen the written update. I thought tonight we look at pictures that we took this morning, because they, it's changing drastically. So can you do the supplemental? Just a fun picture of where we started some of these projects. This is the culinary room.
Brenda, give me 1 second. It didn't share my desktop. Okay, now the people at home can see it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go through the same order that we gave it to you in the update, and Andrews and Tony are going to jump in here. Can you go to the next slide? So the first project I want to talk about is the Mercer Island High School Library. We have really gutted the entire library. So you can see to the left of the picture is the quiet area of the library, and that's a new movable glass wall that will stack. My guess is that it'll be in its extended position most of the time. It's very similar to the wall that we have at the entry of IMS. So passage doors through. The intent there is that it's a quiet study, more study area. It will also double for lots of great area for staff meetings and that kind of thing, where it's enclosed and you can actually use it while the rest of the library is going on.
And in the past, we've actually had to close the rest of the library to students because of the types of meetings that would be going on. So now we'll be able to utilize it for both groups.
So that center area you can see on the wall that used to say periodicals and have the newspapers and magazines. We've taken all of that out, and there's all this booth seating. So a more active area for kids to be able to work in small groups. We've also cut back one of the storage rooms to create a work area for kids to have, printers and the big plotter and all the office supplies that they need to work. That circulation desk is actually a mobile circulation desk out of furniture, so it's all parts and pieces that can be moved around over time. And there is really nothing fixed in the space. So if you can go to the next slide. I'm going to show you a couple renderings. This is the entry as you come in, that work area to the left, and the circulation desk that you'll encounter that's much more front and center. Remember how you would walk in and you kind of looked at the end of it? Next slide. This is standing back by that quieter area, looking back towards the circulation desk. So all new furniture. PTA put $150,000 into the furniture solution in the space. So all of those bookcases are mobile. They don't show on wheels in this rendering, but they are on wheels. So everything can be rearranged in any fashion. There's standing high tables, there's sitting high tables, there's little laptop tables, there's lots of different workspaces for kids. Next picture. So that's the library today, this morning, looking back towards the circulation desk. The new carpet's in. Really, we're just working on finishes. They finished carpet in the main area into the quiet area today. And they'll be working on offices and details this weekend, and then our furniture deliveries start on Monday. Next slide. This is a rendering of that quiet area. So these are movable tables, and then you might recognize those chairs. Those are rocking chairs, or 3-position rocking chairs that we bought for the 97 remodel. And we took 50 of those and had them recovered, but saved the chairs themselves. So the next photo is the actual chairs sitting in the commons ready to be installed. And they turned out just beautiful. And it's kind of neat that we were able to repurpose those. Saved a little bit of money, not a ton of money, but it's a nice gesture to the old library. Next picture. We replaced all of the casework in that area. So each of those are where you see the light coming down are small study carrels for kids. And then there are bookcases on that east wall as well as the south wall that you're looking at here. And again, this was 9 o'clock this morning, and the carpets, excuse me, finished in that room today. The doors that you see are table and chair storage, so that we have a little bit of flexibility. This is the family and consumer science room. So the rendering is showing this in the cooking position, but all of those tables are similar to the quiet dining tables at Northwood, where they have wheels on two legs and fixed on the other, so it's called a sled, where they can be picked up and moved easily. So the room can be configured as a classroom to teach the things that they're teaching now, but then also reconfigured into the cooking mode. So you can see there are workstations on the two walls that include induction cooktop ranges, oven below, sinks, outlets in the front of the case or drawers, and then cabinets above. So we did it with, cabinet doors so that we could try and keep it fairly tidy, because it's going to be a lot of dishes and pots and pans and those kind of things. So this space is about a week behind the library. Flooring starts in here next week. You can advance the next slide. So this is what it looked like this morning. As of the end of today, most of that casework is in. They'll be in drilling for sinks tomorrow, and then flooring starts on Monday. And once that's in, we can slide all the ranges and everything are sitting at the entry. So.
And I just want to point out, when Brandy says we're a week behind the library, we're not a week behind schedule. We're a week behind with where the work lands, knowing that we'll need the use of the library before school starts. And this is more online with the first day of school. So
Correct.
Just to clarify that.
This is the same general contractor who bid these as one project. So following in the schedule, behind it, still on schedule. This is another photo. We took all of the doors off the existing cabinets and replaced them with whiteboard material. So that whole cabinet wall will double as whiteboard and storage. Next slide. We've also done a lot of work in the Performing Arts Center this summer. What you're looking at there is a picture of all the rigging. There's actually 57 different ropes and pulley systems that allow you to bring up different sets and projection screens and all sorts of different things. So Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about the audit?
Yeah, so last spring, I think we talked a little bit about this at one of our earlier meetings where we were doing a full safety audit, and we brought a company in, third party, to kind of come in and just do an overview of the Performing Arts Center. They identified several areas that needed attention, and they also had several recommendations. But part of what we have done is gone through all of these 57 different riggings and basically reworked them. Some of the pulleys have been replaced, we've greased, we've just done general maintenance. We've also replaced some of the large screens or scrims that would come down. We're still waiting on a couple of those parts and pieces to come in, including the main curtain, which was a suggestion that was made after we had started this process, so the order didn't get out as soon as some of the others. But we've done a ton of maintenance within the facility. We are currently waiting to get on a schedule to do carpet work for all the stairs and replace the carpet within the building or within the facility. We've done a full acoustic audit of this Performing Arts Center, and we are working closely with Stantec to come up with a solution. One of the exciting things we did is one of the new drops that came in was this massive projection screen, and it is, I saw it today for the first time with the new projector that Andrews will talk about. It is, man, I want this in my front room. I mean, this is like the ultimate. This is really cool. And of course, we found our favorite Jen on there that we wanted to put that on there. We were chuckling about that today. I was going to share what Brandy said. I said, my gosh, I said, she went over 7 Gs and never passed out. And Brandy says, it's Jen. She travels 7 Gs on a daily basis. Anyway, but I'll let Andrews talk a little bit about some of the other things that are in the works in the auditorium.
So some of the other conversations that we've had with our stakeholders over the course of this year have been around some of the technology improvements that are necessary in the Performing Arts Center, primarily around the audio, the video, and the lighting controls there. What you're looking at here, we actually did install a 3-chip laser projector as the center projector in order to provide a bright, clear, crisp picture with HD quality for people that are in the space. That projector has been installed. We are continuing to work with our vendor to install controls. The video projection will now be able to be controlled from both the stage and the control booth in the back. And so we'll have some additional functionality there. It's network based, so we'll have some additional controls. We have started our audio upgrades, but as Tony mentioned, we've done and you have to remind me, it's a acoustical analysis. So we've had vendors come in to discuss and look at the current space. We're looking at the results from the acoustical analysis so that we can share that with our vendors to properly design a audio enhancement that will meet the needs of not only our drama performers, but also our bands, our orchestras, our presenters. The space is used for a variety of purposes, and so it can be a challenge to ensure that we provide the right setup for all of those different types of events. But we have gone through, we've purchased a upgraded audio console that will also allow us to utilize it with students as part of our theater tech courses that we've added. Students will be able to gain hands-on experience on a up-to-date console that is also networked. We're hoping to be able to leverage students as well in our lighting controls. So we've been working with a parent on the island that has volunteered a large amount of his time to go through and help us in terms of some of the improvements on the lighting. And we've purchased a variety of lights that will improve what we're able to do in terms of scenes to present a little bit more emotion in some of our productions, but then also support some of our musical productions and our presentations. So we've made quite a few improvements, but there are still many more to come throughout the course of this year as we look at, as Tony mentioned, not only just the safety, some of the improvements around, you mentioned carpeting, I know handrails, in a variety of different ways, but also some of that technology throughout the space.
There's a lot of moving pieces to that facility, and to make sure that we're touching them all equally and making sure that we're not going to put someone below the other. We really are taking our time to make sure that we're going through this and that everyone is going to see the benefit for whatever the use is of the space. So it does take time. It's not a quick jump on Amazon, buy some new lights, plug it in, and off you go. There's a lot more to it.
But it also sounds like the investments that we're making are being done with keeping in mind that at some point in the future, we might want to remodel the theater itself, but like.
And that's kind of a two-part, right? Because a lot of what we're doing is we're making sure that whatever we're doing, it's going to carry into those improvements.
Right.
You know, we aren't going to, shortchange something because, we want to make sure that we're spending that money wisely for the future.
Yeah, one of the things I'd add to that is the acoustician that we had come in and do the sound testing. Things have changed in 30 years, the approach to how acoustical design is done. And so at some point, their recommendation may be that we add some additional acoustical panels and absorption and direction. And we're trying to get that information before we go spend money on sound systems and new speakers, and so that we're planning for the future.
Andrews, can you give a 1-minute update on copiers and where we are there? I know especially for our staff as they're coming back to the new year, that's been, and I know it's not part of the presentation, can you just shoot one that in, please?
Sure, absolutely. We have used Xerox copiers in our districts for a number of years. They were in place when I started in 2011. We use a local company, QBSI, to manage and provide those services. But over the last 2 years, I feel like we've really struggled with both our supplies and our service with that company. We've worked with a variety of vendors. We reached out to Continental, to Canon, to Xerox itself, to come in and do proposals. And we've replaced all of our copiers with Canon copiers this year. That's across all of our buildings. One thing that we've been really pleased with is we were able to really push on Canon to earn our business. They put forth quite a few, quite a large amount of sum to help us with our current buyout on our lease. And moving forward, we will actually be able to save roughly about $700 a month on our overall copying and printing expenses throughout the district, which is, I wouldn't say huge, it's not small. Every little bit is going to help, but our staff are going to be able to benefit from new copiers throughout the schools. Issaquah School District is currently using Canon, and reached out to them for references around their service and their support, and they provided some glowing references. And what we've seen so far from their responses have been tremendous. And so we're really thrilled to be able to offer our staff new copiers at a reduced cost to the district.
Nobody ever gloats about the copy machine.
Until they stop working.
That's great. Okay, next picture. This is a smaller project, but a really meaningful one. So in the photography classroom, if you remember, there was a dark room that had the big turnstile door and all of the old enlargers and everything in there. So Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've done there?
Yeah, so we met with the teacher last spring, just before school got out, and the space just wasn't used other than just for clutter. And what she was hoping to create is more of a gallery, a place that they could really utilize the space for more of the type of photography that we're doing now with digital photography and what have you. So we went in, we completely gutted the room. We took all the enlargers out. We took all of the individual, on the picture on the left, you can kind of see all those different plugs. Every one of those plugs was a built-in booth for enlargers. So we completely gutted it and went with a bright white paint and redid the floor and just kind of really opened the space up. So now that program will have a much better place to go in and display their art and be able to view it along with some of their larger equipment that they'll use. Their enlarger and bits and pieces like that. So.
This is a view from the top of the new platform that we put in, the temporary platform for band that looks down onto the JV field. So that's in place and it'll be there for 3 or 4 months, 4 months, I think. And then it'll be.
This will really help with the field use as marching band come, we're constantly having to shuffle the chess game with who's on what field where, and by allowing the marching band to have an elevated surface, they'll be able to utilize this field the same way that they utilize the stadium and not have to move something else that we really want that softer turf for, impact or things like that. So it just adds flexibility for a few months during the marching band season.
Excellent. Another big project that we have underway this summer is replacing the bleachers that are 1960s vintage. When we did the 97 remodel, they were old, and we serviced them and capped the seats. They had no aisles, non-compliant guardrails, money spent every year to bring somebody out to service those to keep them running. This has been in the CapTech levy for a while, so we bit the bullet this year. All the bleachers are out. That what you see in there is the first 54-foot truckload of materials. The rest arrive tomorrow morning, and they'll be here all weekend. And our plan is to turn it over next week to the school. Next slide. South Mercer Playfields, big project this summer, is moving right along. I put the graphic up here just to remind you. Girls softball field, competition level, and then the large multi-purpose field with a small soccer field at the east side. Next slide. I'm not sure the drone can fly high enough to get a full picture, so I had to splice a couple of drone photos together here for you, which isn't very pretty, but gives you a sense. All of the turf and organic material has been removed. Remember, we talked at the last update about there's a profile that was put in with the original field where there is drainage below, bedded in gravel, 10 inches of sand on top of it, and then kind of the organic material and that is collected over time along with the sod. So what we've done is take the organic material and the sod off, kept the sand. We're putting a crushed rock base over a fabric on top of that, but all the drainage remains in place. And we've potholed throughout to verify that that drainage is still in good condition. And so next slide. We've got a good portion of that out. You can see on the left that we're putting in the anchor curves that will, is where the turf will attach to. So it separates the two, natural grass on one side, and that'll go all the way around this new turf. So that was the first pour. They pour it in about 230-foot segments. And then the picture on the right is the electrical trench that's dug for the conduit to go out to the new light poles on the south side of that new multi-purpose field. And that's Dave Anderson, who's been our engineer, lives on the island. It's worked out really well that he lives about a mile from this site because he's there every day. And then Greg and crew from Field Turf on the left. So we're proceeding well. I expect that we'll see turf laid in October. Lighting will go in September, and then turnover before the end of the year. Also working really well with the city, our partners there, and staying in good communication about the whole South Mercer piece. So next slide. We're also putting in the EV charging for the first 2 buses. So this picture on the left is taken if you're standing at the blockhouse and looking towards the stadium. You can see that trench that we've taken across to bring the power over. And then the picture on the right is all the conduit that's in to support the transformer that steps the power down, small transformer, and then charging stations themselves. When I checked with Patrick, it sounds like they're still expecting buses this fall, but probably,
Late October.
Yeah. And then our favorite project of the year, admin building sewer replacement. It's been a dirty, messy, difficult job, and I won't go into any of the detail, but the new line is in. We're all happy about that. It's all operational, and Tony won't have to snake that line 5 times a year. He's very happy about.
That's right.
And we're gonna leave it like this probably until later in September, and then hydro seed so that we don't have to dump thousands of dollars worth of water on it to keep the grass to grow in the heat. So that's it. Any questions?
No, this was, yeah.
Thank you for the update. Very much appreciate the large photo. Makes it seem really real.
It is real, and we are in the 9th inning, and we are coming in fast. So the next couple of weeks, we will be
Are we gonna get an official board tour of some of these facilities? and
happy to
stuff?
give you a tour.
Okay.
I'm gonna bake us something too in the.
You're gonna make us
Center.
muffins?
Yeah.
No, all I can promise is the first pitch. I can't go beyond anything like that, so.
Thank you, everybody. We're gonna recess for 10 minutes. Yeah, okay, it's 7:53, so. 8:05. Thank you.
Thank you.
are moving on to board policy 1800 OE9, communication and support to the board. 2022-2023 superintendent communication plan.
Thanks. This will probably be something that greater utility may be coming back to as I check in with you as a board. You had in the contract that we agreed upon for me that you wanted a communication plan. Want to thank the team that's kind of listed here on the front page who helped, try to bring some formality to it, but also help push my thinking. Ian Henry, our communications coordinator, Cam Dreves, Michelle, and Lynn, our public records officer. Each of these people, I mean, it's all incumbent upon us to communicate in a positive way about our school district. These are people who are at front and center with that oftentimes from a district perspective. I'm not sure about going through the whole thing. I know we've had a long meeting. We have other pieces and I'll come back to it, but just want to, really outline, my goals and what I've been up to. Really making sure that we're thinking about a positive and collaborative relationship with our internal staff members and our internal partners, but also our external school community members, really strengthening the overall support of our school district, not just from passing levies and bonds, but being able to speak favorably about us to realtors, friends, families, and others. Also using a variety of media to maximize our awareness, supporting our goals, objectives, and services. We have really tried to push greater use of social media, even over the summer, making sure we're telling our story and getting out ahead of that. I was pleased to see we had some stories picked up in the Reporter this week. We've had a few this summer. We have a few more in there in painting us in a positive light. And we'll continue to work on that. Certainly trying to connect our schools with their communities. The high school has had a profile, if you will, annual profile. We're now working on a profile for every school. So we have some materials that we can prepare and easily hand out to our future families and or those who are interested. But also just thinking about how do we use social media in different platforms to better inform and more consistently inform. I've heard from you as a board, we've heard from the community that, we have a lot of different ways that we're communicating. How can we condense that down? We've got some exploration opportunities lined up to look at some new vendors and really consider some new options. Also then, achieving really those coordinated communications kind of dovetails into that. And so that it's not just us communicating out, because communication is about listening. How does an institution, how does an entity, how does an organization listen? And that's really what that's speaking to there. How are we gathering that feedback from our community? Certainly our students, our staff, our parents. And then creating key messages and talking points for our school district. So we're communicating consistently and accurately. And that's not about controlling the message as much as it is about being transparent, open, honest, and consistent with the message. So those were the 5 focus areas. And then as you can see throughout the plan, I put strategies and actions about what you can expect to see as a board, about our intentions as a team, and me as the superintendent being able to back that up. I've been on a listening and connection tour. I've tried to keep you up to speed a little bit about what it's looked like since once you hired me. And to date, I have some more updates for you that I'll put in the next board report or maybe next week's. But people like my meeting with the city manager that I had. We had coffee the other morning and just talking about short and long-term plans. But her being able to talk favorably about our team in that South Mercer playfield and how is that working? How are we connecting those? For her to be able to share a little bit more about their plans for their levy coming up, really opening up those lines of communication. And then also our representatives representatives down in Olympia and our senator had a great conversation with them, as I alluded to. Grateful for their time it wasn't just a conversation about how are we going to communicate. Fortunately, I know them. They know me a little bit, now they know me in a different light, but I had a great opportunity to paint the picture of what's the reality of a school district who funds levies based on student enrollment and why that's such a challenge for us. And they really wanted information. They wanted information from Dr. Booby about things that she's been working on, particularly when we're talking about out of district, but also more importantly, out of state placements of students and the lack of opportunities in the state. And so some work there that we're working on. So those kinds of meetings, I'll join Rotary Tuesdays. They'll be inviting me into Rotary. And so I'll start that. I've asked Ian to serve as our representative to the chamber, and they're really starting to get going. Hopefully you're participating. I think they have a survey out right now. Asking for community feedback about how the chamber can shape differently. We've got a chamber event at the high school in November to showcase our new spaces, to bring businesses and others into the school. So really just trying to think about those partners. And then I met with several members of the clergy from across the island. They used to meet more often. They hadn't from COVID. And so it was an opportunity for them to get together and for me to connect with them. Really thinking about, they're seeing students, and when we talk about that whole child, the spiritual aspect of life for some of our families is really important. If we were to have, a major event, a tragedy, we know we'd be calling upon them. So really trying to reach out and build a partnership there. So those are just some ideas. I'm happy to take questions on this, or I could bring back aspects of it as we move forward. But I know we have a long meeting, but just wanted to get the plan out.
Yeah, thank you for this. Like, I think it's a good start. One of the things I would urge you to consider like going forward is how to engage when it comes to community engagement. What might be loosely termed interest groups, various ones in the schools. I mean, those that we heard at the end of last year, drama and fine arts feel like perhaps they're not heard from enough, or so to have a group that represents those highly capable. I mean, certainly that was a discussion that we've had throughout the year. I think there's certain communities where English is not the first language spoken in the home, like how to organize recurrent meetings with that group. I would like to, I think some of the existing committees, there's a lot of overlap, perhaps with people who are heard by the administration, that their views are known. But how do we engage with those that where there's a lot of interest and that they feel that they're not heard from? And how do we systematize that?
Yeah, so actually kind of related comment. I want to say, first of all, this plan is a thing of beauty. I'm so delighted to see this plan. Like, I've already seen tremendous outreach in terms of our social media use as a district over the last, I don't remember when Ian arrived halfway through last year, kind of like February, March.
November,
Okay.
right before.
Halfway through.
Thanksgiving.
We'll call it, okay, fine. Early in the year, whatever, it took me a little while to get up and running. So I sort of feel like starting in January, February, I started to see a lot more social media usage, and it's been great. Like, I've had to have people mention to me things they know that are happening in the district because they've seen them on social media, which even people that don't have kids in the district anymore. So that's fantastic. Really, I'm so happy with the comprehensiveness of this and the approach and the kind of proactive nature of a lot of this. So I have two questions. One is related to what Dan was just talking about. Sometimes during the year, we'll all become aware of a communication gap where the parents will be like, "But we didn't know about this thing," how are you planning on, and you don't have the answer right now, but just my question for future is how are you planning on identifying those communication gaps and making sure they don't happen again? I know last year when the HiCap screening results came out, there were parents who were getting to choose between putting their kids in the HiCap classroom versus keeping them in their having them get services in their home classroom and in their home school. And they were like, we don't know what, parents new to the district, haven't had other kids go through this, and they were like, we don't know what these choices are. And and we have to decide by like Friday. And they couldn't really find information, they couldn't get information. So if you hear that from a parent, that there's like this gap, like where in your system is there like you talked about listening, but where in the system is there sort of like a formal way that someone can kind of flag that, like a teacher or an administrator in the schools, and be like, hey, we need more info about blank. So I just feel like that's something that would enhance this plan even further. And then I want to know how you're going to communicate this plan.
So tonight, I had Ian hold it back to put out there because I wanted to bring it to you first as the board. So moving forward from here, it will now become part of what will kick off on Tuesday, which is a series of community presentations. This will be part of that. It will go on my superintendent's page. We'll message it out. I'm hosting an event with I don't know how many realtors we have, Michelle, coming in September, 25 or 30. I think we're up to. So we're inviting a number of realtors from around the island. They're going to come and meet with me. I'm going to give them a full-scale presentation of highlights from the school district and give them information. This will be part of that as well. As I go out to the schools, as soon as the start meeting with PTAs and others, I'll be bringing this forward. Kind of bits and pieces of it though, not necessarily in the full, but I can direct it back to the superintendent's webpage as well.
Let us know if you want a board member to for the night with the realtors. And you mentioned thought exchange in the plan, and I know we paid $25,000 for that last year so that we could use it during the superintendent search. So I don't know if it's justifiable to keep paying for it for another year now. Like I love thought exchange. I think it's much better, but I don't know if we can really justify that expense.
So some forward thought by Ian Reeves. I'm going to let him talk about it because he's been at the wheel on this because we have the same questions that we are kicking around as we think about every dollar spent.
Yeah.
And so to get out ahead of that, Ian Reeves.
Actually, can I just see what Tam wants to ask real quick?
Oh, sure.
In case it's related, and then we'll do that.
Yeah, thanks, Magatai. Yeah, I really appreciate the comprehensiveness of your plan, Fred, and Dan is saying is I would also urge to add in kind of like an equity cultural lens in this communication plan. And because what I'm hearing from Dan, and which I agree with, is like when we do a plan, sometimes it works for the majority. And we're always striving to hear the voices that, even though they're not very large in number, but oftentimes they are the highest in needs, like, or furthest away from like the academic like standards, or have like the highest needs. And so it's always good to kind of have an equity cultural lens in when we're doing something, to ask, who are we missing, whose voices are we missing, and how can we make sure that their voices are included, and how do we adapt or reduce barriers. I think you always mention about how do we reduce barriers and communicate in a way that is easier, more relevant to their way of hearing information. So I think having kind of that perspective, that framework to as an overall way to kind of look through your communication plan, which is I feel is very good and in depth, would add to even be better to fully make sure that everybody is being heard. And so I just want to add that in support of what Dan was saying, but adding kind of like the equity cultural perspective.
Thank you, Tam.
So going back to what Superintendent Rendell was alluding to, as part of this communication plan, we looked at the total amount or number of tools that we have in place and really looked at what functions they serve. Are they a function of providing information out to many? So, one way out from the district out to the community. Do they have the ability to allow parents and community members to provide feedback? What are some of those different things? And then from there, we try to identify potential alternatives that would look at potential ways to meet some of those community groups that are non-native English speakers. What are some of the functionalities and tools that are available there to help us communicate with those groups as well? From that, we are working with a variety of vendors. We are planning on doing a demo of Parent Square later this year. That will happen closer to January as we want to focus the fall on launching our website and some of our other tools. But Parent Square is one tool that we're looking a little bit deeper into. And you'll be hearing more about that as we reach out to community members that might be interested in that initial pilot to look at that tool. We've also heard from several of our board members and our community members around Blooms as a product to look into. So we've been continuing in conversations with them. You mentioned Thought Exchange. I do feel like Thought Exchange is a very valuable tool, and it definitely met a significant need that we had last year. However, it required us to initiate a question or pose an open question to the community and then have them respond. It wasn't necessarily a tool that allowed them to just reach out and share back. Not to say that we can't leave a open-ended question, open all year. So just looking at a variety of different ways, but for Thought Exchange in particular, our agreement renewal was actually earlier this month, and we chose not to renew initially. Primarily because of the cost. It is a significant cost. And we felt like even if we decided to launch Thought Exchange in September or October, we could re-engage at that point, but not necessarily commit to that full year as we explore tools. So we have not walked away from Thought Exchange as a potential tool to utilize, but going back and looking at, again, not only just ways that the district can share out to the community, but looking for ways that the community members can also reach back to us outside of public comment and sending individual emails or reaching out to the board and asking you to share on their behalf. So looking at ways that they can further engage with the district.
That's great, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. All right.
Moving on, we have the first reading of the 2022-2023 board calendar.
Do we
We
first school council?
Oh, did we miss something? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
OE6 budgeting, financial planning, city district interlocal agreement, school counselors.
The city councils had a chance to take a look and pass and sign off on this year's interlocal agreement for our mental health counselors. And so it's traditional, then it comes to you as a board in August. A couple areas to note on that. There's really not changes to the agreement in terms of the operational side of how we work together. The real change is they have committed another mental health counselor to the middle school. So they will have 2 mental health counselors at the middle school, 2 at the high school, and 1 in each of the elementaries. I will say that hiring mental health counselors right now is very challenging. There is not a large pool, and we have a current posting that's out there as part of our ESPER grant that we haven't been able to fill yet. And they had 2 postings, actually, the one for the middle school, and then the Island Park counselor took a different job. So we have found a counselor for Island Park, found what we think is going to be a great fit with Mr. Woolmuth down there as our new principal. So we'll have a new principal and a new YFS counselor that we're excited about. And Derek and Tammy Cork have been great with that. So we're still looking for the second counselor for the high school or for the middle school. And then they also want to add, they used to do the internship position that supported the middle school, and they're going to look to now move that internship position to the elementaries. And so provide a little bit more support to our elementary schools. Outside of that, our fee remains $60,000. That's been consistent over time for our financial contribution to that. So those are really the big changes. Outside of that, agreement still pushing forward. And looking forward to that partnership.
Any comments? This requires action. So that's a motion.
You can either go on consent agenda next time or you can take action.
We just take action.
I move we approve board policy 300 OE6, budgeting, financial planning, the city district interlocal agreement for school counselors.
All in favor of approving? Do I have to really say that again? All in favor of approving the interlocal agreement on school counselors, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0.
Just super quick. I mean, this is, we all know, but just to reiterate on a yearly basis, this is the gold standard for providing services for our kids. And we could not do this without the city's input and cooperation and money, which none of us, especially right now, take lightly. And also know that there's counselors as our students still struggle to, struggle period, and finding mental health counselors is so difficult. To know that we have people in the schools for them is, it's very much appreciated, so.
I've also been learning a lot more about other cities on the east side, other districts on the east side, and how their school counselors are funded, and it's a really unusual arrangement that we have, and really, it is the gold standard, honestly, yeah.
And other districts are cutting on counselors as
Yeah.
they need to make their budget cuts. So we are very fortunate and very thankful to the city for this contribution to education.
I think before I joined the board, I did not realize how significant the city's contribution was, that it's like 10x what the district puts in. So, thank you, city. Okay, now, the 2022 to 2023 board calendar, first reading, tentative draft, which for some reason has Greek, like a Greek font on the top line, which
It
says,
used to be all in Greek.
Yes, it
So we've been
says-
slowly but surely chipping away at it.
I'm happy to say I can read, it says annual board agenda draft. I don't know. We all know.
I know
what
the
we're
lecture.
You're keeping them on their toes.
Yes. It's good for the brain.
Make sure that we were actually reviewing our
That's right.
paperwork.
I don't know how, can't think how we usually do this. Do we just like look at it, or do people want to comment?
I can provide, I'll remind you a little bit of context from September. Not a significant, a big part of your conversation around this at the retreat was, how can we make the linkages more meaningful? And so the ask was for us to go back and take a look at some dates where it wasn't necessarily contained within a meeting, but perhaps it's outside and it's a different meeting for the real purpose of linking. And so it's not such a long night and you can be more invested in that. And so you also talked about how maybe we can put two together into those nights and have them back to back or at times. So the significant changes that you see here are really to the linkages and allowing them to happen at a different cadence, and then also including, combining a couple of them together into those nights. So that's really what's reflected there in the linkage changes. And the other change you see that's blocked out is the approval of the BEA annual plan. OSPI did away with that particular piece. Instead, we fill out a lengthy survey that's submitted directly to OSPI. You no longer have to approve under 1600 or 600 it was. They've done away with that. So that's why that's crossed out. Otherwise, no changes from the discussion.
So we're not at this point, at least I didn't see it doesn't look like it doesn't look like we're splitting up sort of business meetings from kind of big picture, big thinking meetings, correct, at this point?
Not necessarily to that same piece. I think what we can do as a team, you look at some of the months where it says, let's just look at October. You have October 13th, and then you have the October 27th. Those are your regular meetings. So we have two different opportunities there for OE monitorings, plus we have the SIPs. I think putting those into the same meeting is going to be challenging, even though that would be more like that kind of the business versus operations. But we can talk when we're building the agendas, the board president, vice president, and myself, we can talk about how we want to set those up. It was really not as easy to kind of think about business versus operations versus teaching and learning.
So that's something we can kind of continue to play with a little bit as we do the individual agendas. So, okay, well, that sounds good to me. I really like the separate linkage sessions not tied to a regular board meeting and two of them back to back. So we can kind of be in like linkage mode.
I think that's gonna make a big difference.
Yeah.
And Michelle and Superintendent Klosky really took the lead on this. So Michelle, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody Have any other comments, questions? Great, that was just for discussion, I think, yeah. Okay, next item is OE9, Communication Support Board, proposed revisions to Administrative Policy and Procedure 2161.
So the next two are technically administrative policies. They don't have to come forward to the school board. We have chosen as a team to bring them forward because we know that special education and special services sometimes can be a place where you've received a lot of questions over the years. It's been a place that maybe has a little bit more public interest. So for full transparency, we wanted to bring forward what these changes are. The backdrop of this is some of these changes are because of legislative action and changes in OSPI guidelines, which are required for us to make these changes. So it's not approval for you, but we wanted this to be informational, so you have an idea of what is happening as we go forward. So both Aaron and Sue Ann have worked together on these, so I'm going to turn it over to them.
I'm just pulling out my notes. I can give you a high level highlights. You can do that.
Okay, I can do it. So that if you look at, I'm not driving, no worries. So if you look at the administrative
Under
policy, pardon?
I was just telling Andrews it's under G.
If you go to the markup for A, there you are, perfect. If you'll see, most of this is just cleanup. You say general educational programs and what have you. And then there's clarification of the students who we're speaking of. And instead of trying to not define students by IEP students, they're not IEP students. They are our students first, and they are being served with an IEP. So it's that type of clarification. So that was pretty much the change here, is just cleanup on the A. There's more significant changes on P. If you want to go to the P markup. Do you have any questions on A?
I was going to say high level, there's new definitions from the state around a regular early childhood program. So just bringing that language into alignment. The age that we can keep students labeled as developmentally delayed has changed from 9 to 10. So just bringing some of those pieces into alignment. And so Aaron did the heavy lifting.
P.
No, I think you're good. So if you go to P, on this one, this is this, oh, that is this one, you're correct. But starting at the top, I just want to back up. Starting at the top, some of the changes were specific to ensuring access, to touch on what you were referencing earlier. So ensuring access for all parties and all parents, irrespective of their backgrounds, be it language or disability. So there's some clarification if you look on page 3 with respect to that, and ensuring that we are documenting what their parents' language preferences are. There's also other references to the types of meetings where we'll ensure that that parents are invited and that we will maintain documentation. And they've added and expanded the types of meetings to anything with placement, which was there before, but they've added discipline and truancy or the other types of meetings that they are specific for students who have IEPs. So that was just a little higher up. Sue Ann, you can go ahead and take it from here because that's later on is what you were referencing.
Oh, okay. No, I'm sorry, I just did it backwards. So the parent participation, the referral process, in the past, the referral process had to be in writing. Now it's oral and in writing. So to recognize that not all parents know the law and or are able to communicate that in the same way. And it also requires us to have a form available for parents in multiple languages to help them with the referral, the child find or referral process. We are fortunate, we use a product here called IEP Online. It actually translates for us in multiple languages for parents if we need to. And what's nice is we can do the IEP once and we're charged one fee. And if the parents want changes, we get charged not $1 more to make all those changes and resend it and have it retranslated for the family. And so that is something that we're turning on, is something we haven't turned on in the past, but we're turning it on in the system, so that the parents have access to that. I'm just looking here. Oh, and the transition from Part C to Part B. So that's that early childhood piece, that birth to 3, and making sure that we are working with the outside agencies to get students to our preschool or into community preschools at age 3 and getting them services where they enrolled. So we want them to enroll with us, it'd be nice, but we also serve students with disabilities in their community preschools.
So if you scroll down to page 16, you'll see just a continued commitment to the fact that we provide student services and they are not placed in programs. So before there was a reference to you're a PLP student or you're going into the PLP program and that type of thing. And that is just not what we're doing because people are not their program. So it's they go to the school or a place where they will get the services they need and that are delineated under their IEP. And that helps ensure that we are thinking of the students first and not the program. So they're not kept in that box, even if it's just mentally by staff or parents alike. So you'll see that change as well, which was not recommended by WASDA, but that is our district's change because this is district specific language.
You want us to roll in at 3246?
Yes, please,
Let's go ahead and do
unless there's
3246
questions,
and we'll.
let's just do
we want-
3246.
Yeah, and then we'll still do them together because they're both going to be special services.
So 3246 is around restraint and isolation. Yeah, go ahead.
So 3246, the initial 3246A, there's really minor changes. And most of the revisions that are distinct are in the P, which is the procedure, but there is some addition of the RCW and the WAC, which we think is helpful to staff who would be referring to this policy or parents, so they can at least look at where we are getting this information. So those were added there, as well as the update to the December 21 issue. The more significant changes do appear in the P, so if you could go to that in the markup. And really the change with restraint and isolation, and there is a cross-reference in the last policy to this policy, is that the restraint and isolation, there's certain restraints that are no longer allowed, which is prone positions and that type of thing. So it just calls that out. It does provide conditions for specific use of isolation or restraint, which was omitted in prior iterations of this procedure. But the other thing is they've changed the training required to use restraint or isolation to include trauma-informed crisis intervention and de-escalation techniques. So if any staff member using restraint or isolation must be currently, which is also a change, trained in practices that do include trauma-informed crisis intervention for the safe use of isolation and restraint, unless there's an emergency and there's no one with such training present and is required to do that for the safety of students or others. Now, that being said, the district's training already did include that, but it is in the law. We want to make sure that anyone looking at this is aware of our obligations as a district, as a staff, to keep children safe. So that's the significant change here.
And just as a reminder, the board in OE9, which comes forward usually in December, section 18, we do an annual report to you about restraint and isolation. Another reason why we wanted to make sure that we got this to you so you saw what's changing. But we'll provide you the report as always, I believe in December. I can go back to that. So questions or feedback on this? Again, it's administrative, but we wanted it to be in front of you as a board just because of its has high visibility.
I appreciate the update. Thank you.
That was good, thank you.
So moving on, we have OE9 communication support to the board, proposed revisions to board policy 1420 meetings, consent agenda.
So the next three policies that are going to come up are all board policies, so these do require a vote. They can go on consent agenda if you would like. And any suggestions that you're proposing, this is your policy, so we're offering you suggestions and looking for feedback. Karen.
If you could go to the markup of 1420. Sorry.
No, you're okay.
So the edits here were recommended. First of all, we just did some clarification of how we have typically written our policies in terms of capital utilization and what have you. A significant addition is that the meetings will be posted in advance on the district website or website hosted for the district. Is an ad, because there are times in which if our website isn't working, we may want to use, and there were examples of this in our state where districts were forced to use either the cities just because their website was down for whatever reason. So it just gives us that flexibility. It's not our intent, but it does give us that flexibility. The other piece is if you, it just includes what has to be in the proposed agenda for special meetings. That was omitted from our policy, though was in the WASDA policy before, so we added it back in. I'm not sure why we didn't have it originally, because I think it's a good addition. And finally, on the consent agenda, it says if a debatable is what it used to read. If a debatable item appears on the consent agenda, and really it's any item, it doesn't have to be debatable, and we don't have to get into a conversation as to whether or not it is or is not debatable. So that we made that change as well, to really recognize that that any item can be heard. So those are the recommended changes. And again, because staff, myself particularly, thinks it's helpful, I do think it's helpful to add legal references when we're updating the policy anyway. So I've included those there. Any questions?
So my question is just about the first paragraph. It says that we'll get copies of the proposed agenda, blah, 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 including relevant supplementary information at least 3 business days in advance of the meeting. That doesn't always happen, right? Like sometimes we need to sort of slide into home plate the day of, like when there's new information coming in, that kind of thing. Like does having it written out like that obligate us to have that information available 3 days in advance?
Well, typically we do try to get things 3 days in advance, and we do attach the relevant supplementary information. Typically what you haven't seen, and I think Director Glowitz, brought it up, is that we were not providing to you the non-required superintendent updates, which often included significant presentation materials in advance. And so you were seeing them for the first time in the meeting, even when they were perhaps already prepared. And we made a commitment, at least that was my understanding. So I'm looking at my superintendent here, to post them as soon as they are available, but they aren't required because you're not taking action on those items. This is a recommendation of WASDA, but if I'm hearing that there's an interest instead on, I'm not sure there's a requirement that supplementary materials be attached unless there is action to be taken. So I do think there's an obligation if there's action to be taken, because you're to make sure the community is aware of what is actually being discussed.
That makes total sense to me, but I'm just saying, like, as this is written, just something to think about, like, as this is written, it's really saying that all relevant supplementary information will be presented 3 days.
Maybe required instead of relevant.
Yeah,
Required.
yeah, maybe, yeah, required supplementary information would make
What
that.
allows us to update material later on, updates originally posted? Is there updates allowed? I mean, we do an initial posting, I get that. The question would be, is edits or updates allowed, with less than 24 hours notice?
For things that are, I'd have to look up the exact piece. I know for information items, yes. If you're going to be taking action on something, that one you wouldn't be able to take the action.
Well, but
on
if
that.
we can make a motion and change it in the meeting, so.
You pull something from that, right? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
like
But-
if we're taking action on something.
And propose a language change and then vote on it. But at least the topic and content is
Exactly.
there, so the base
Yeah.
materials are present.
Yeah.
But I believe though, I would want to double check, but I believe the requirement is that it must be 24 hours in advance, which is, if you recall, there was an action item that was related to reduction in force that was not properly posted 24 hours in advance, so it was edited. I think it was 18 hours before when edit, and the recommendation I made at that time was to not take action because it had not been appropriately noticed. Because without 24 hours, it's not appropriate notice for an action item. But I will, I will double check. And I'm happy to take into consideration required versus relevant. I think that might be a good addition because this is just a language ported from the laws to law policy. But in practice, I hear the concern that there are things such as the presentations that I mentioned earlier that have not historically always been 3 days or 20.
Because this is consent agenda, you've typically seen things either 2 weeks ahead of time or whatnot. You know, this is referring only to consent. You've generally seen them, but I think it is a good idea. Let's take a look and see if there's some language in there, because sometimes there are items on consent.
I thought this first part was all the agenda though, because it also mentioned special meetings. and
Oh,
stuff,
it's
so, yeah.
proposed agenda. You're right.
Proposed
It's
agenda,
not
yeah.
the consent.
Yeah, and I just think relevant supplementary information, we could argue a lot about what's relevant, same thing as whether something's debatable, you know, so, anyway, thank you for considering.
And then the first part, where we posted on random website.
Backup website.
Yeah, that's a little confusing because people regularly know to go to board docs or a certain place. And I don't know what it means when it's on some other website owned by the superintendent of school. I wouldn't know where to go look for it. I wouldn't know how to discover it. It seems it's opening the door to, you know, kind of clandestine activity going on, which is not the intent. I appreciate that, but does seem like could be misused.
So it's more about an emergency situation, so maybe contextualizing it within that is really what we would need, because, you know, we would normally do it in our district website, you know, unless in an emergent situation where that's not feasible, then it's a website hosted. I think you're looking for that, but I think there's a second part of what you're saying, Director D'Souza, which is, you know, how do we make sure that that doesn't become the default, or how do we notice people to go there so that they know the information is there?
Well, you could say.
Like go after
or-
appropriate notification.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
for instance,
or you could say, or in an emergency on another public website posting on the district's behalf, or something like that, then people would know to go to the city website, for
Well,
example, or like.
well, I guess my suggestion, and it would be after our website goes to the district and the superintendent's office.
And then or an emergency.
You know, well, upon appropriate notification solely in the case of an emergency, you know, or, you know.
Yeah.
I said the theory would be that this wouldn't occur.
Yeah.
But
And I don't think,
but it just, if for some reason the website is operational, it would allow for you to, and I said in the situation that, as I understand it, people would communicate it via different avenues to make sure. But we will look at that language and bring a revised.
The goal, as I'm understanding it, is to not have someone say, this decision you voted on is illegitimate, because you did not post it on the district website. We say, but our website was, you know, hacked and was down for 2 weeks. We want to cover ourselves.
Because of what we're doing here, I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, I get what you guys are saying but I just don't, it's just not something that's gonna come up. And if there are website or technology issues, everyone in the community is gonna know that there's website technology issues and
I'll stand out there with the sandwich board.
right, exactly. I mean, like I said, I get it, but I wouldn't spend so much time on language.
although for the 3 business days, I do feel individually that even though it's not an action item, historically, a significant amount of time has been spent on superintendent's report. And if that is relevant and important, I think like all other relevant and important information, it should be disseminated beforehand, so there's an appropriate time for everyone to process and digest that information. And to me, like, that doesn't change. It's like, the information is either relevant or not. Like, there should be time to appropriately review it. It's not contingent on whether there's an action associated with it.
I've thought a lot about this in terms of our meetings, and especially listening to you about how to also make the meetings, shorter, more efficient. And as evidence tonight, the things that I needed to share with you, I wanted to put into the agenda and hook them to one of your OEs. That's your expectation of me. So those superintendent reports at the beginning, yes, I have a space later on to give you announcements, and I have some for that. I think there might be some time with some last minute updates or something, but my intention is to put as much into the OEs and actually use policy governance to structure it a little bit more. I know it's not set in stone. If you want to try it out for a while, see how I'm doing, and then we can talk.
Do we want to take action on this? We want to wait and have it come back to us again, it sounds like?
I think we want the updated version.
Yeah.
Then we take
Okay.
action.
Okay.
Consent agenda is okay, or do you want to talk about it again next?
Consent.
Consent agenda is okay.
I guess
Pull it if we
it'll
want.
depend.
can also pull it.
Yeah, you can put a follow.
That's fine.
I mean, I do think that transparency and trust kind of begins here. If you've got policies with holes in it, that's kind of the simplest litmus test of whether you've got transparency and trust. And so, for that reason, I think it is important. I do care about it. It's as you point out, it may have marginal, real world impact, but I think people coming into our policies and all that will hold us to account.
I don't mean that about the 3-day. I meant in terms of like the emergency website thing is, the 3-day, notice I think is really important. I think we need to keep in mind that, that our superintendent reports changed dramatically with COVID.
Yes.
And so they, before that, at least in my experience, and David can speak to it longer, it was not the substantive reports that we have been getting, and I appreciate moving back to the policy and addressing it within that, so.
Does that mean you don't want to put it on the consent agenda, or that you, no, sorry, David.
No, put it on consent agenda is fine, but I'm just saying that I think it's important.
It's important. Yeah, okay, great.
I think I've heard your interests.
Okay. Next item is OE9, communication and support to the board, proposed revisions to board policy 5011, which is the sexual harassment of district staff.
Yeah, so the change to this policy really stemmed to, in the procedure, there was already a cross-reference that it would be investigated on the definitions, requirements, and procedures of the student analog, which is 3205. And the recommendation was to include that in the policy itself. So you don't have to go dig in the procedure to find out how you're going to be going through this, because the procedure then just directs you to the other procedure. So the recommendation was to include that in the policy itself. And the district felt that was an appropriate recommendation because it gives people who are in this situation an easier time of finding where they should go.
That seems very logical. I see no reason we couldn't just take action on this one tonight. Unless that's your questions. Can I have a motion?
I move we approve the board policy 5011 on sexual harassment.
Second.
All in favor of approving the proposed revisions to board policy 5011, please say aye.
Aye.
I,
Thank you. All opposed say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Great. One more. Board policy OE9, communication support to the board, proposed revisions to board policy 5400, personnel leave.
So you'll see in this policy, there's a change in the title. Used to say board administrators and other confidential employees, but we have employees that under the law are, that this governs, who are just non-represented, but they would not be considered confidential under the definition of confidential under the law. They're in our, so it's just a clarification of who this applies to.
Maintenance and operations.
Maintenance and operations.
are maintenance.
Or no. The sentence at the top is actually just brought up from the bottom, so it's not changed, just changed in order. Really, the substantive change to this policy is the addition of vaccination, which came out of COVID, which is on employer request, the superintendent designee has discretion to consider providing unpaid leave to employees who refuse to provide proof of required vaccination or unable to obtain a medical or religious accommodation. Use of unpaid leave for employees who are not yet compliant have to be limited under the law. So this is specific to that vaccination piece. The other substantive change is that just defining that the district retains the right of assignment for a position. It didn't say for the length of time. So you were just on unpaid leave. Was that 5 days? Was that 30 days? So it's defining the length of time for which your exact position is preserved, and 20 work days seem to be what we saw in other districts. It also seemed appropriate because that's a full month. And at that point, you may have brought someone in to backfill. The option to provide unpaid leave does not obligate the district to do so, and that was just language out of law stuff. So just
one authority to provide, like discretion to provide something. I mean, I can, like, I tell my kids all the time, like, I'll consider that. like whether I do or don't grant the request is a different matter. Either is fine, I just think.
I think discretion means like you get to make the decision.
Well, but I'm saying,
Yeah,
but I'm saying like,
Well,
giving
he
someone the
might-
discretion to consider something.
Right, but he might say, I'm not considering these requests, period. That's why I think there's two meanings. I don't know why WASDA made the decision to word it the way they did. I don't, I mean,
Okay, then maybe you can consider it, you can't.
The
Sometimes
Supreme
discretion
Court
is just
decided
why I
they
don't want to do the case.
right,
Yeah.
No, that's is actually fair, like maybe it means you can say like, I'm not considering these unpaid
Right.
leaves, so
This
just
is
don't
our
bother
policy,
to fill
right.
out.
yeah, I'm not using any
First
discretion.
I'm totally fine either way,
Right.
let's just leave it. Is that okay? Let's just leave it. Okay,
I
so
think it's,
we kind of half made that motion, can we like, I don't know how to
You
do
can
that correctly, can you retract that and then make the motion again without the change?
I retract the motion and move that we adopt the language by WASDA, whether it's. Correct.
Second,
Okay, all in favor of this modification of board policy 5400, as is, please say aye.
I,
I,
All opposed, please say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Thank you. And now we have the consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda as published.
Second.
All in favor of approving the consent agenda as published?
I,
Say aye.
I,
All opposed, say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0. Superintendent's report.
Great, just a few things tonight. First off, had a great meeting with our student board reps. Asha's really looking forward to getting started in September. Andrew's been a great mentor for her already. We've also had some outreach to the board president, myself and Andrew from Seattle Public Schools, trying to figure out tricks of the trade with bringing student board reps on. And so it's been fun to watch Andrew in their document, giving them advice, and we've had a chance to. And then Paul Noon, who was a student board member, dropped by the office the other day. He'd just spent a summer in Ecuador, finished his first year at Georgetown, had an internship with Congresswoman Del Bene, and he's doing great. And he continues to refer back to his time on the board as being a really influential part of his academic time. So it was great to see him. This weekend, we expect the Espert story to publish on the Seattle Times. I sent a letter to the community last spring, kind of preempting this because we had heard that it was going to publish, really reiterating what it is, how we participate, and most importantly, how we keep student information safe and secure. Ian has gone back to find that. We'll be reposting this to the website if it's not there already, and then doing some social media ahead of this so that if families are seeing it in the Seattle Times, they already see what proactive measures we've taken. The story seems to really be focused on whether or not districts are doing everything they should with respect to keeping student data private. I think we are taking all the necessary steps. We have a data sharing agreement with King County on this, and Michelle reached out to our colleagues in Tahoma, part of our CCS group, who had also received some public records requests and had received really favorable feedback on how they handled it. We reached out to them, and Michelle handled our data requests to the Seattle Times in the exact same way. I'm not anticipating any issues, but it might be in the news. Next is just quickly the calendars with the month of August as we start to get in. I started adding them into the update last week, just reminding about new educator welcome on August 22nd. You don't need to write all this down, we'll get it to you again. If you can make it to Northwood, 8:15 to 8:45 to welcome in our new staff. We have an instructional technology day on August 25th with an all-staff barbecue. So if you're interested in coming kind of the middle of the day to the all-staff barbecue, you're welcome to. Then we have our professional development day on August 26th back at Mercer High School. We have guest Shelley Moore, who will be there with our staff. August 31st is our first day of school, and September 6th, our kindergartners arrive. So we're getting close and getting excited. And finally, just an update on transportation communication. We'll continue to put this out there, but Patrick has really been doing a great job in transportation. And this year, we're really promoting having families sign up for their routes. It not only helps us, we're using a new system now, much more user-friendly on both the user end and our end. But it also allows families to track using the GPS, much like Uber and DoorDash, where you can see where your food might be. You can see where your kid is in case you're running late to the bus stop. You can call the neighbor and let them know the bus is pulling up. So just some added features. More importantly, though, when we have a bus that can't make it around, a tree's down on West Mercer Way, we're rerouting buses. We can communicate directly to just the families on that bus. We don't have to communicate the 304 bus, and then everyone's like, my kid, what bus are they on? We're just communicating to the people who it impacts. So a nice upgrade that Patrick's been working on.
That's great.
So with that, that's the end of my report tonight, other than a little over a month in, absolutely enjoying my opportunity to serve the district in this new role, surrounded by tremendous people. We've got some great things happening, and I'm really excited for what's coming there.
Thank you. Legislative representative?
Yeah, so one update, I think everyone probably received an email on August 1st from WASDA, which has the handbook for the General Assembly, which will be in September 30th. A fair number of the legislative positions, as well as permanent positions, or just consolidation, wordsmithing. There are some substantive ones, in my view, and I'll just sort of highlight a handful because I think it's reflective of perhaps general trends. One is online learning and increased funding for that. I think there's questions to some extent if it sounds good, but perhaps there's a finite pie, and will voters continue to fund education if it's online and that's seen as increasingly the direction that schools want to go? Sort of similar to that, changes in graduation requirements and the extent to which a job can count towards graduation requirements. I think both of these are well intended, but I think there is a question, in the long term, does this sort of hollow out the core mission of school districts? Perhaps not for ours, but we get funding from the state. So I'm not sure the long-term effects are necessarily beneficial. A few on the technology side to highlight. One is when it comes to social media, if basically bringing the school districts into the fray and able to issue a takedown notice to the social media companies. I'm not sure again that this one, though well-intentioned, may put school districts in a very uncomfortable spot and exposed to additional liability, and not sure that school districts should be assuming that role, and that's good. Another one on the technology side is when it comes to apps like Google Classroom, what providers are able to use on, even if it's on an anonymized basis, or maybe using for data and marketing. It sounds like there's like some FERPA doesn't cover necessarily those applications. That seems sensible, at least on my read. Trying to give you a handful of others is a new one, which I think is good, that when it comes to statements for and against levy proposals, that those have to be written by people that reside within the applicable district. We've seen sort of boilerplate statements against that it just at a state level, it has no person doesn't live in the legislative district that's impacted. I think that they should and have skin in the game, and it seems pretty congruent with officials have to live in the district. All of us in which we run. It seems it should be the same for legislative positions. One other that I get the sense, because there's two alternatives that might be a little bit overreach. An amendment to an existing legislative position that the equity analysis for any new legislation has to be undertaken by a person of the affected group. I think one that raises questions if it's actually compliant under equal protection laws. And I think two, it sort of asks the question, what follows from that when it comes to particular subjects in schools, can those only be taught by certain people from the relevant backgrounds? And again, perhaps well-intentioned, but I think not particularly well thought out. That's my read. It's 190 pages or so. It won't happen until September 30th, but those are the highlights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board reports? Nothing. Tiana, do you have any board report?
No, I don't have any board report, but I do want to mention that I apologize for just RSVPing my 3 kids into the school district. And the process is so much easier than a couple of years ago. And so so I appreciate how much easier it is, but it is still overwhelming as I'm going through it. I'm like, if I know that this is what it takes, I might not have more than 1 kid. Because after you do 3 kids, you're like, oh my gosh. But I realize it's already easy, but I just can't imagine for those who, like my parents, how did they ever get me through school? But I appreciate the district really working on the technology aspect to make the RSVP process as easy as possible to reduce some of those barriers.
Thank you. I don't have anything. I hope everyone's going to enjoy the tail end of their summer. Those who get summer off. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second. All in favor of adjourning this meeting, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. That passes by a vote of 5-0, and it is now 9:11 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, staff, for staying so late.